Welcome. You've arrived. Wherever you are, whether your heart feels heavy or light, scattered or still, this is a space where nothing is required of you. No answers to find, no self to fix. Just you. Listening. This is the Empty Boat, a quiet channel for quiet hearts. Here, we don't promise salvation, we offer stories, old stories, whispered by moonlight in forgotten temples, new stories, born from the ache of modern souls. And in between, a silence where healing happens without effort. Each tale you'll hear is a doorway, sometimes into grief, sometimes into laughter, sometimes into nothing at all. But all of them, in their own way, bring you back to this one moment, breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat. So sit with me, feel the ground beneath you, close the door gently on the world, and let's begin this journey, not towards something, but into the deep stillness that's always been waiting within you. Story 1. The teacup that couldn't hold anything. There once was a small temple nestled deep in the mountains, far from the villages and the noise of the world. It was a place the wind passed through like a quiet visitor, where moss grew in the cracks of old stone steps, and the air always smelled of pine and incense. In this temple lived an old Zen master named Ayan. His name meant eternity, though he never spoke of time. He didn't teach in the way most teachers did. He would sweep the courtyard for hours without a word, or stare at the sky as if reading something between the clouds. Disciples would come and go, carrying away fragments of silence they mistook for wisdom. One summer morning, a young scholar climbed the mountain path to visit Ayan. His name was Haru, and he had spent his youth collecting knowledge like rare coins, books on logic, philosophy, psychology, sacred texts in ancient scripts, sutras recited from memory, hours of podcasts and talks and systems for awakening. But despite all this, Haru felt restless. The more he studied, the more he longed for something beyond words. He had read of Zen's sudden enlightenment and believed Ayan could help him attain it. When he arrived at the temple gate, he was trembling. Not from fatigue, but from anticipation. He bowed deeply and entered, sandals dusty, eyes sharp. Ayan was sitting on the veranda, watching a spider mend its web. Haru bowed again and said with confidence, "Master, I have come to learn the truth of Zen." Ayan looked at him, but said, "Nothing." "I have studied many paths," Haru continued, "from Madhyamaka to Mahasi, from the 4 foundations of mindfulness to neuroscience models of consciousness. I've practiced Vipassana, Zazen, koan introspection, but I feel no peace. My mind is full, but my heart is thirsty." Ayan nodded slowly and gestured toward a low wooden table. "Would you like some tea?" Haru nodded eagerly. He thought, perhaps this is part of the teaching, a test, a ritual. The old master poured tea into a small porcelain cup before Haru. Then he kept pouring and kept pouring. Tea spilled over the rim, ran across the table, and began to drip to the ground. "Master," Haru cried, "the cup is full." Ayan stopped, set the kettle down, and looked into Haru's eyes. "Like this cup," he said softly. "You are full. How can I give you anything if you do not first empty yourself?" Haru opened his mouth, then closed it. He felt his pride retreat like fog before the morning sun. But he finally whispered, "How do I empty myself?" Ayan stood. "That," he said, "is your first lesson, and your only one." That night, Haru stayed at the temple. He sat under the old plum tree, listening to the insects and the rustle of wind in the bamboo. His mind kept returning to the tea. He thought of all the ideas he had collected, all the theories and techniques. Could they be the very thing keeping him from tasting the real? He tried to let go, but even letting go became another idea, another effort, another doing. He stayed for weeks. Ian rarely spoke. He never explained. He cooked simply, swept the grounds, tended the small vegetable patch. Sometimes he asked Haru to help. Sometimes he didn't. One afternoon, Haru exploded. "This is ridiculous. You don't teach. You don't correct me. You just sweep and stir soup and talk to flowers." Ian looked at him with eyes like still water. "Do you see this broom?" he asked. "Yes," Haru said, breath shallow. "When I sweep the floor," Ian said, "I do not think of dust. I do not think of clean. I do not think of Zen. I only sweep." "So you're saying Zen is sweeping?" Ian smiled. "No, I'm saying sweeping is sweeping." That night, Haru couldn't sleep. He realized his whole life had been like a man holding out a cup, not to drink, but to measure. Every teacher, every practice, every insight was poured into that cup, only for him to weigh it, compare it, criticize it. The cup had never touched his lips. One early morning, just before dawn, Haru woke to a strange sensation. Stillness, not outside, but inside. His mind, always racing, was quiet, not empty, not full, just open. He walked outside. The plum tree was in bloom. A single blossom had fallen into the old teacup left on the table. It floated, unmoving, in the cool morning tea. Haru sat down, picked up the cup, and drank. It tasted like nothing. It tasted like everything. Commentary. This story is deceptively simple. A master pours tea into a full cup. A metaphor you may have heard before. But the heart of this story is not in the image. It's in the friction Haru feels when faced with a truth he cannot intellectualize. The teacup is not just our mind. It is our identity constructed around knowing, proving, seeking. In the modern world, where information is everywhere and performance is rewarded, many of us carry Haru's burden, a deep thirst for meaning buried beneath a surface flooded with concepts, podcasts, courses, therapies, systems. We try to know our way out of suffering. But true peace begins not when we add more, but when we subtract, when we stop acquiring and start attending, when we stop analyzing and start being. Zen is not opposed to knowledge, but Zen points to the space before knowledge arises. Psychological reflection. From a therapeutic perspective, Haru's struggle mirrors a modern cognitive dilemma known as over-identification with thought. This occurs when we confuse our thoughts with our essence, when we think we are what we think. In acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, this is described as fusion, being fused with mental content. We're so busy managing, fixing, understanding our mental life that we forget to experience life itself. The invitation here is to notice the full cup in your own life. What beliefs do you hold on to so tightly that they've become walls? What feelings do you try to think your way through instead of feel your way into? When did you last drink the tea, really drink, instead of grading it? Emptying ourselves does not mean erasing memory or rejecting intellect. It means making space. It means loosening the grip, letting the water of experience reach our lips before we judge its taste. Closing reflection. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, "In a mind that is empty, light enters." And the Zen master Rinzai once said, "Just put thoughts down and rest." This alone is the great teaching. So, dear listener, tonight before sleep, sit quietly. Imagine your mind as a teacup. Gently ask, what am I still trying to hold? What would it feel like to simply taste the moment? Don't try to answer. Just listen, and in the silence, let yourself be poured into. Story 2. The Angry Bell of Mount Yorin. At the summit of Mount Yorin stood a temple carved into the stone itself, weathered by time, shaped by wind, and held together by prayer. Few pilgrims ever reached it, for the climb was steep and treacherous, but those who did often returned with eyes softer than before, as if something hard inside them had finally broken open. Within the temple hung an ancient bronze bell, tall as a man and older than memory. It was called Gun, meaning deep echo. It was said the bell's voice could be heard halfway down the mountain when rung at dawn, a low, trembling sound that stirred even the moss-covered statues into stillness. But there was something strange about this bell. Whenever someone struck it too hard, it would crack back with a jarring, ugly clang, as if protesting the violence. The sound would not echo. It would recoil, sharp and bitter. The monks began to believe that the bell was angry. One winter, a new monk named Riku arrived. He was young, strong, and proud of his devotion. He had come from a city monastery where discipline was strict and answers were clear. But he had grown tired of rituals and longed for something real. When he heard about the bell, he laughed. "A bell cannot be angry," he said. "It is just metal and form. If it sounds wrong, it is struck wrong." But the other monks warned him, "Gently, here we do not strike the bell. We ask it to speak." Riku smirked. "Sounds like superstition." The abbot, a serene woman named Myoan, said nothing. She simply bowed and left Riku to his practice. For days, Riku meditated with fierce intensity. He sat through cold winds without flinching. He fasted longer than required. He scrubbed the floors until the wood wept. But inside, he was not still. He resented the silence of the others. He judged the softness of the monks' ways. And deep within, there was a rage he did not name, a tight knot of something unspoken, unexplored. Then came his turn to ring the morning bell. He stood before Gun, raised the wooden mallet, and struck, firm, clean, proud. The bell screamed. It was not a tone. It was a wound, a metallic cry that shattered the dawn's stillness. Like broken glass, birds scattered. A child in the village below reportedly wept in her sleep. Riku froze. His hands trembled. From the shadows of the colonnade, Myoan stepped forward and spoke for the first time. "Do you know," she said quietly, "that bells hold memory?" Riku didn't respond. Myoan touched the bell's surface. "This bell has rung through war, through peace, through famine and festival. It remembers hands that struck with reverence and hands that struck with anger. It echoes both." Riku stared at her. "It's just a bell," she smiled. "And you are just a body. Yet when someone speaks harshly, why do you flinch?" Riku opened his mouth, then closed it. That evening, he sat alone beneath the eaves, listening to the bell's echo still caught in his chest. Commentary. The bell is more than a symbol, it is a mirror. In Zen, we are not taught what to think, but invited to see how we are. When Riku struck the bell with pride and intensity, it did not reflect the sound he wanted. It reflected the state he was in. Much of our suffering arises not from events themselves, but from the way we strike the bell of experience. We react harshly. We judge instantly. We speak before pausing. And then we are surprised when life echoes back discord. But the world is not cruel. It is responsive. It is a bell. The question is not, why does life sound so loud, so sharp, so bitter? The question is, with what am I striking it? Psychological reflection. Modern psychology refers to this phenomenon as emotional reactivity. When we are unaware of the emotional states driving our behavior, anger, fear, pride, we act from them. We project, overreact, lash out, or withdraw. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, teaches us that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In Zen, this space is sacred. Riku had not learned to sit with his emotion. He channeled his internal tightness into control, perfectionism, and criticism. But none of that softened the knot inside. Instead, it bled into how he rang the bell, how he lived. The bell responded in kind. We all carry such a bell. Our nervous system stores echoes of past harm. Trauma research shows how the body holds emotion even when the mind forgets. If we approach the world with tension, the world vibrates with it. But when we learn to pause, to soften, to ask the bell to speak, rather than demand, it begins to sound differently, gentler, truer. Closing, reflection. In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha said, "Like a solid rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not moved by praise or blame." And in Zen teaching, the sound of the bell is not in the bell, it is in how you listen. So ask yourself tonight, what have I been striking with force, expecting harmony in return? What would happen if I listened first, deeply, before acting? Let the bell of your being rest. Let its metal remember peace. And when you must speak, touch the moment gently. It will echo the same. Story 3. The leaf that didn't want to fall. Autumn came late that year. The forest behind the Windgate Temple had clung to its green longer than usual, as if reluctant to let go. Only in mid-October did the colours begin to bleed through, soft, yellows at the edges of the birch leaves, fire in the maples, a rusted gold in the oaks. The monks welcomed it quietly. Autumn was not just a season of endings, it was a teacher. It reminded them that letting go could be beautiful, all except for one. On the southern path that led up to the temple stood a lone plum tree. Modest in size, but fierce in spirit, its leaves were still green while every other tree had begun to surrender. Day after day, leaf after leaf clung tightly to their stems, trembling at the edges, but refusing to fall. One morning, a monk named Sora paused beneath the tree. He was sweeping the path, as he did each day before sunrise. But this time, something pulled his attention upward. A single leaf, bright green and trembling, caught his gaze. It moved, as if fighting the wind. "Still here," Sora whispered. He smiled, but it was a sad smile. He had seen this before, not with leaves, but with people. Years ago, before he shaved his head and put on robes, Sora had been a caregiver at a hospice. He had watched people in their final weeks, some slipping away like dusk, others gripping life with clenched fists, afraid to fall. The body often understood what the mind could not, that everything born must dissolve. That morning he whispered to the leaf, "You don't have to be afraid." The leaf trembled in reply. Sora spoke to the abbot later that day. "Master," he said, "there is a leaf that refuses to fall." The abbot was an old woman named Ema, whose eyes always seemed to hold the whole sky. She looked at him with warmth. "Perhaps it's not time yet," she said. "But the wind is strong. The tree is ready. Every other leaf has let go." Ema nodded. "Then the leaf must be carrying something it's not ready to drop." Sora tilted his head. "A leaf?" Ema touched her chest. "We all carry something, child. Even leaves." That night, Sora had a dream. He stood in the forest under a sky of floating lanterns. The trees whispered like monks reciting sutras. And in front of him was the plum tree. Only now it spoke, in a voice soft as breath. "I am not afraid of falling," the tree said. "But one of my children is." Sora looked closer, and the green leaf blinked like a frightened eye. "I promised her she could stay," the tree said, "until she was ready." Sora reached out, but the leaf flinched. He withdrew. "She doesn't know what's below," the tree continued. "She thinks falling is the end." "And is it?" Sora asked. The tree smiled. A slow, creaking gesture. "Everything I am," it said, "comes from leaves that once fell." He awoke in silence. Outside, the wind had died. The moon cast pale shadows across the stone path. And still, the leaf held on. The next morning, instead of sweeping, Sora sat beneath the tree. He did not speak. He simply breathed. He did this for several days. He no longer asked the leaf to fall. He simply kept it company. Then, on the 7th morning, it happened. The wind stirred gently. A hush passed through the forest, and without drama or struggle, the green leaf let go. It drifted, slowly, like a sigh, and it landed in Sora's lap. He bowed. Commentary. In the story, the leaf becomes a symbol of our deep fear of change, especially the kind that feels like loss, death, or endings. While the seasons turn and others surrender gracefully, part of us resists. We grip tightly to roles, identities, relationships, stories, anything that keeps us from the unknown. The leaf is not stubborn, it is scared. This is true for people as well. Behind every resistance is often a wound, unacknowledged, unspoken. We delay grief. We deny impermanence. We fear the fall because we have forgotten what waits beneath. The Master's words. Perhaps the leaf is carrying something it's not ready to drop. Invite us into compassion, not judgment. Just as the tree holds space for the reluctant leaf, we too can hold space for the parts of us that are not ready. Eventually, letting go is not forced. It is allowed. Psychological reflection. In psychological terms, this story touches on complicated grief, identity loss, and fear of ego death. Change, even necessary or healing change, can feel like annihilation to the parts of us that formed in pain or survival. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but grows." Modern trauma therapy emphasizes that healing does not come by pushing ourselves through, but by building enough safety that letting go becomes possible. Sora's role is not to fix the leaf, it is to witness it. Presence, without agenda, becomes the most powerful force of transformation. For those struggling with transition, end of a relationship, career shift, spiritual disillusionment, loss, this story offers a sacred reminder. You do not have to rush your fall, but know that falling is not the end. It is part of the cycle. The ground you fear is also your root. Closing reflection. In the Udana, the Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering." And in Zen poetry, the falling leaf is not dying, it is returning. Tonight, close your eyes. Picture something within you that is holding on too tightly. A regret, a role, a version of yourself you no longer need. Now ask gently, what would it feel like to let this fall? Don't force an answer, just listen. And when it's time, like the leaf, you'll know. Story 4. The monk who cried in the rain. The rain had arrived without warning. One moment the sky was clear above the southern mountains, and the next it wept like a sorrow long held back. The drops were not gentle, they fell with weight, like memories, like truths. The monks at Cloud Mirror Temple moved quickly, gathering laundry, covering scrolls, sheltering the incense fires, all except one. Down in the moss-covered courtyard stood a lone figure, motionless, soaked through, his hands hanging at his sides. It was Brother Akeno, the quiet one. He made no attempt to shield himself. His shaved head glistened with water. His robe clung to his thin frame, and on his face, unmistakably, were tears. But no one disturbed him. No one asked. At Cloud Mirror, silence was a form of listening. Akeno had come to the temple 5 years earlier. He was not like the others, who had arrived with questions about enlightenment, or the self, or the Dharma. Akeno had asked nothing. He had simply shown up, carrying a canvas satchel and the weight of a man who had once believed in something, then lost it. The abbot, an aging monk named Rincho, had accepted him without condition. No questions about his past, no tests, no vows, just a warm meal and a place in the corner of the zendo. Over the years, Akeno became part of the rhythm. He swept the steps before dawn. He tended to the rock garden. He chanted sutras with soft voice and low eyes. He never caused trouble. He never asked for anything, but no one had ever seen him cry. Until the rain. That night, Rincho brought a pot of hot barley tea to Akeno's cell. He set it down gently and sat across from him. The walls were bare except for a simple calligraphy scroll. "This too is the path." Akeno bowed slightly. "Thank you, Master." Rincho poured the tea but said nothing. After a long pause, Akeno spoke, almost in a whisper. "My son's birthday is today." Rincho did not react, only poured the second cup. "He would have been 16, Akeno continued. "But he died at 9. Fever. I wasn't there." Another silence. "I left after that. I couldn't look at anything without seeing him. I wandered, slept in parks, thought about ending it. Then I came here. I didn't come to awaken. I came to disappear." Rincho looked at him with eyes full of moonlight. "And yet, here you are." Akeno nodded. "I thought I had become empty. But today, when the rain came, I remembered how he used to dance in it. No shoes, just laughter. That sound echoed in me, and the tears came before I could stop them." Rincho smiled gently. "You did not fail your practice. You began it." Akeno blinked. "But I was lost in sorrow." "No," Rincho replied. "You were finally found by it." For the first time since coming to the temple, Akeno did not sit in zazen the next morning. He walked into the forest behind the temple and sat beneath the dripping cedars. He did not try to stop his thoughts. He did not try to breathe a certain way. He simply allowed the grief to be real, not an obstacle, not an enemy, just a guest. For hours he sat, listening to the rain in the leaves, the birds shaking off water, the wind folding through branches. His son's name circled through him, his son's laugh, his son's face. But for once, he did not chase the memory or flee from it. He let it pass through, like rain through fabric. And in that silent surrender, something shifted. Not release, not forgetting, but presence. The grief was not gone, but it was no longer exiled. It had been given a place at the table. That night, Aquino lit a single candle and whispered his son's name aloud. He did not cry, but he did not smile either. He simply bowed. Commentary. This story is not about enlightenment. It is about grief, and how in the quiet, unspectacular permission to feel, we begin the real practice. Aquino is not healed by silence. He is not saved by rain. But in allowing himself to feel sorrow without resistance, he steps into something the Buddha called dukkha, the mindfulness of suffering. Not to escape it, not to fix it, but to be intimate with it. In Zen, crying in the rain is not failure. It is a kind of prayer. We do not transcend grief by denying it. We transcend it by making peace with its presence. Aquino's tears were not a break from practice. They were the practice. Psychological reflection, modern therapy, especially trauma-informed care, recognizes that healing often begins not when pain ends, but when it is witnessed without judgment. Somatic therapies like internal family systems, IFS, or compassionate inquiry teach that emotions are not problems to solve, but messengers to listen to. Grief, especially long-suppressed grief, can live in the body for years. It doesn't obey logic. It doesn't follow schedules. It waits, sometimes silently, sometimes loudly, for space to move. Aquino's breakthrough is not dramatic. It's human. It reflects the core truth in both psychology and Dharma. We suffer not because we feel too much, but because we believe we shouldn't. In creating a sacred container for pain, be it a forest, a friend, or a cup of tea, we give suffering what it needs most. Room. Closing reflection, the Buddha said in the Salatha Sutta, when touched by a feeling of pain, the uninstructed person sorrows, grieves, laments. He feels two kinds of pain, physical and mental. But the instructed person, mindful, does not add a second arrow. And in Zen, they say, rain falls on the temple roof whether we sit or cry. And still, the rain is true. So tonight, ask gently, what grief have I been pretending not to carry? Can I let it sit beside me, not to solve, but to witness, and, if tears come, know that they too are sacred. Cry in the rain. Let the world weep with you. Let healing begin, not by rising above, but by kneeling into the storm with open hands. Story 5. The Cat That Waited at the Gate. There was a temple with no walls. Only a wooden gate stood at the edge of its grounds, aged, leaning slightly, covered in moss and prayers. Travelers who passed by were often confused. They would stop, bow out of politeness, then look around, wondering, where is the temple? But those who stepped through the gate always felt something change, softly, subtly, like walking from noise into stillness, or from thinking into listening. And just outside that gate, almost every day for nearly a decade, sat a cat. She was white with grey patches, thin but not sickly, and she had the gaze of someone who had seen the world but no longer needed to chase it. The monks called her Mitsu, meaning gentle light. She never meowed, never begged, never crossed into the temple. She simply sat, watching the entrance, and she waited. For what? No one knew. One spring, a new monk arrived. His name was Jun. He was young, with quick eyes and quicker thoughts. He had come to the temple not because of faith, but because his therapist had suggested silence might help. He had burned out. Too many screens, too many deadlines, too many people talking at once. Something inside him had collapsed, like scaffolding pulled too fast. Jun didn't know what he was looking for, but he hoped it lived in stillness. When he first saw the cat, he was puzzled. "Is she yours?" he asked a senior monk. "No," the monk replied. "She belongs to no one." "Why doesn't she come in?" The monk smiled. "Perhaps because she already has." Jun frowned. "What does that mean?" The monk bowed. "You'll see." Jun began his daily routine. Meditation at dawn, chores through the morning, silent meals, evening chanting, sitting again under the stars. He struggled. His mind was like a radio left on, always changing stations, regret, worry, craving, memory. Every time he tried to follow his breath, he ended up in a thought about groceries or childhood, or what he should have said in that last email 6 months ago. But the cat was always there. Each morning, when Jun walked past the gate, Mitsu was sitting, eyes half closed, still as stone. At first, he ignored her. Then he began to nod. Then, one day, he stopped. "You've been here a long time," he said. The cat blinked. "Waiting for something?" She yawned, stretched, and lay down. The next day, he brought her a small bowl of water. She did not drink it, but she also didn't. Days turned to weeks. Jun began to watch Mitsu the way a student watches a teacher. She never chased birds, never begged for food, never wandered far. She just waited. Rain or shine, she was there. And gradually, Jun began to realize something. She was not waiting for anything. She was just there, present, rooted, attentive, still. The gate no longer mattered. Who passed through didn't matter. She simply sat, eyes soft, body relaxed, as if the whole world had already arrived. And so, Jun tried something different. He stopped trying to meditate. Instead, he sat near the gate, not cross-legged, not with a straight back, not with any agenda. He just sat, with the cat. For the first time in his life, Jun began to notice silence, not as the absence of sound, but as a presence in itself. He noticed the wind in the grass, the sea, way sunlight filtered through clouds like breath through linen, the smell of old cedar mixed with earth. And in that space, something softened, not suddenly, but like thawing snow. The urge to improve, to achieve, to get somewhere, began to fade. And, in its place, came a sense of enoughness, just sitting, just being, like the cat. One afternoon, a traveller approached the temple gate. She wore a business suit, her hair in a tight bun, eyes darting like birds. She paused when she saw the young monk sitting beside the cat. "Is this the temple?" she asked. Jun looked up. "Yes." "But where's the building?" Jun smiled. "Sometimes the building hides the temple." The woman looked confused. "What do you do here?" Jun looked at Mitsu. "Wait," he said, "and notice." The woman looked at the cat, then at Jun, and for a moment she didn't ask anything more. She just stood quietly and listened. Then she bowed and walked away. Jun turned to Mitsu. "You're better at this than I am." Mitsu flicked her tail. One morning, Mitsu did not appear. Jun waited. An hour, then 2. No cat. That evening, the monks gathered and said nothing aloud, but their faces spoke. Some went to the forest edge. Some checked beneath the steps. She was gone. The next day, the abbot called June aside. "She taught you well," he said. June's eyes were wet. "I never asked her why she stayed." The abbot nodded. "Maybe she didn't stay. Maybe we arrived." Commentary. The cat in this story is not magical. She is ordinary. But her presence becomes extraordinary because it reflects something we have lost in modern life: stillness without purpose. Mitsu waits, but not as an act of seeking. She waits as an expression of being. There is no urgency in her posture, no expectation in her gaze. She teaches, not through words or instruction, but by embodying non-striving. June arrives at the temple with the familiar modern illness, performance anxiety of the soul. Even in spiritual practice, he wants to succeed, do it right, fix himself, find peace. But Mitsu's presence invites something else: the permission to just be. In Zen, this is called shikantaza, just sitting. Not meditating to become enlightened, not breathing to become calm, but simply sitting, without aim or fear. To sit like the cat, to live like the cat, to be like the cat. Psychological reflection. In psychological terms, Mitsu represents what mindfulness experts call non-reactive awareness. She is not disengaged. She is deeply present, without needing to intervene, fix, or escape. She models what trauma therapist Deb Dana calls ventral vagal tone, a nervous system in regulation, grounded, curious, open. Jun's transformation is not into someone more spiritual. It's into someone more simple, less effortful, less defended, more attuned. Mitsu never teaches with words, but she teaches presence. And in our world of chronic overstimulation, that is no small gift. Sometimes the greatest healing does not come from answers, but from being in the presence of something that expects nothing from you. Closing reflection. The Buddha once said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." And a Zen saying goes, "When nothing is done, nothing is left undone." Tonight, sit for a moment, not to be better, not to be calm, not to be mindful. Just sit, like the cat at the gate, and ask softly, "Can I be here without needing to get somewhere?" Let your breath be your cushion. Let the world come to you, and if stillness comes, welcome it. If restlessness comes, welcome it too. The gate opens in both directions, but presence never leaves. Story 6. The Master's Broken Bowl. In a quiet temple by the river, nestled between bamboo groves and clouds, lived an old Zen master named Hakuin. He was small in stature but vast in presence. His words were few, his gaze direct, and his silences, the kind that made people speak less around him. Some whispered he had once been a warrior. Others said he had died once and returned. But those who truly listened knew that Hakuin had simply seen through the illusions most still clung to. Among his few possessions, there was one he cherished, a clay alms bowl. It was not ornate. It had no markings. But it had travelled with him for over 40 years, from mountain caves to village temples, from drought to flood. It had held rice and rainwater, soup and snowmelt, and in its humble roundness it had held his life. Each morning, Hakuin would carry the bowl down to the river. He would rinse it slowly, letting the cold water clean not just the clay, but the dreams of the night before. Then he would sit beneath the plum tree and eat in silence. His disciples admired the bowl, but they also feared it. It seemed to radiate something sacred, like an extension of the master himself. "Be careful," they whispered to one another when passing it. "It's the only one he's ever used." One windy morning, as the leaves spun in circles across the courtyard, a novice named Daiki stumbled while carrying a tray. The bowl was on it. It fell. Clay met stone, and the world cracked open. The sound echoed like a bell struck wrongly, sharp, sudden, final. Everyone froze. Daiki gasped, dropping to his knees, staring at the shattered pieces. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to." But Hakuin said nothing. He stepped forward, looked at the fragments, and, without a word, picked them up, one by one, and placed them gently in his sleeve. Then he walked away. No punishment, no lecture, only silence. The temple changed after that. Hakuin stopped going to the river. He used a wooden bowl now, plain, functional. He ate in his room. His quiet grew quieter. Daiki was tormented. He avoided Hakuin, ashamed. He practiced harder. He slept less. He meditated until his knees bled. But inside, something grew tight, a question that throbbed like a wound. Why didn't he get angry? Why didn't he scold me? Why didn't he say anything at all? Weeks passed. Then one snowy morning, Daiki was called to Hakuin's room. He bowed nervously. "Master?" Hakuin was seated at his desk. In front of him sat a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Come," he said. Daiki stepped forward. Hakuin opened the bundle. Inside were the pieces of the broken bowl, mended with gold. Every crack had been filled with shimmering lines of lacquer and dusted gold powder. The bowl was no longer smooth. It was a web of fracture and light. Daiki's eyes widened. "You fixed it." Hakuin nodded. "Do you know what this is called?" Daiki shook his head. "Kintsugi," the master said. "The art of golden repair. In Japan, when something breaks, we do not discard it. We honor its history by mending it. The flaw becomes the story." Daiki felt tears in his chest. "I thought I had ruined it." "You did," Hakuin said, smiling. "And in doing so, you revealed something I could not see before." He held the bowl to the light. The gold lines gleamed like rivers. "I loved this bowl because it had been with me through everything," he said. "But I had begun to mistake it for permanence. I forgot it too, could change." Daiki knelt. "I'm so sorry." Hakuin shook his head. "Do not be. The world will break everything you love. That is its way. The practice is not to protect, but to repair." He handed the bowl to Daiki. "Hold this now. Let it teach you." Daiki took the bowl in trembling hands. And for the first time, he understood that Zen was not in perfection, but in the mending. Commentary. This story speaks to one of the deepest truths of the human experience. Everything breaks. Relationships fracture, bodies age, dreams shatter, and sometimes what breaks is not external, but within us, the self-image we built, the identity we clung to, the belief that we could stay whole forever. Hakuin's bowl is not just a vessel, it is a mirror. When it shatters, so does the illusion of permanence. And yet, through the act of kintsugi, we see that repair is not defeat, it is beauty. To live is to be cracked. To heal is to let the cracks shine. Zen does not ask us to pretend we are untouched by time. It asks us to turn toward our scars with gold, not shame. Psychological reflection. In trauma therapy and narrative psychology, the idea of post-traumatic growth explores how people can become more whole, not by forgetting their wounds, but by integrating them with meaning. The practice of kintsugi aligns with this philosophy. Rather than hide the brokenness, it is highlighted. The scar is not erased, it is honored. This is radical in a world that prizes flawlessness. For many, shame becomes the glue that binds their identity. They try to appear unbroken, but in doing so, they deny themselves the most sacred kind of healing, the kind that requires being seen as is. Hakuin does not scold Daiki, because in Zen, the mistake is not the problem. Clinging to perfection is. Healing begins when we stop hiding the break. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Dhammapada, just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, so the wise are not moved by praise or blame. And in Zen, it is said, the crack is where the truth enters. Tonight, sit with a part of yourself that feels broken, not to fix, to witness. Ask gently, what would it mean to mend this with gold? Imagine the crack, breathe into it. Let light enter, not because you will become perfect, but because you are already enough, even in pieces, especially in pieces. Story 7. The Echo in the Empty Valley. There is a valley in the north where no village was ever built. The earth is soft there, and the air always carries a hush, like the forest is holding its breath. Old maps don't name the place. Travelers pass it without noticing. But those who have wandered into its silence know the valley speaks, not with words, with echoes. They say if you call out into the empty air, the valley will answer, not with your voice, but with what you are truly saying underneath. A monk once went there long ago to test it. His name was Ryota. He was known for his sharp tongue and quicker temper. Though brilliant in debate and skilled in scripture, Ryota had not yet touched peace. His insights sliced, but never softened. His words commanded, but did not comfort. One day, after a bitter argument with another monk, Ryota was sent away by his master. Go to the valley, the master said. Say nothing until you have heard your own voice. Ryota, proud and irritated, left at once. He reached the valley by nightfall. The moon was rising, half full, pale and patient. Ryota stood at the edge and shouted, I am right, the valley answered. I am right, he scoffed. See? Just echo, but something about the way it returned, the slight delay, the hollow reverberation, unsettled him. He shouted again, You are wrong! The valley replied, You are wrong. He paused. The words came back softer this time, almost sorrowful. He shouted louder, You're a fool! The echo replied faintly, You fool! He grew angry. You're a coward! And again, coward. The word hovered in the dark like a ghost. Suddenly he felt the back of his neck prickle. He stopped yelling. He listened. And the silence that returned wasn't empty. It was full. Full of all he had just said. Full of what he hadn't meant to reveal. The valley had not mocked him. It had simply returned the truth he carried. He sat down, heart pounding. Ryota stayed for 3 days. He stopped shouting. He began to whisper. Why am I angry? Am I angry? Why do I need to win? Need to win? Who am I without my pride? Without pride? And slowly, the echo changed. It no longer mirrored his words exactly. It began to answer differently. When he whispered, "I'm afraid," the echo replied, "Safe." When he said, "I've hurt people," the voice came back, "Forgive." It wasn't magic. It wasn't a trick. It was as if the echo had become his own stillness answering back. The third day, Ryota stood and bowed to the valley. "I will listen now," he said. And the valley replied, "Listen." He returned to the temple. He spoke less. When he did speak, his words no longer pressed down, they opened. He did not apologize for his past anger. He did not justify his change. He simply began to live from a quieter place. Other monks noticed, but said nothing, until one young novice approached him after a lecture. "Master," he asked, "how did you change?" Ryota smiled. "I stopped fighting my echo." Commentary. This story holds a paradox that Zen understands well. The world reflects us, but not always in the way we expect. Ryota's anger returned to him not as punishment, but as clarity. The valley did not argue, it revealed. We are often like Ryota, projecting onto the world what we fear, what we defend, what we refuse to see in ourselves. We label others selfish, weak, wrong, only to have our own hidden wounds echoed back in experience. But when we listen, not to argue, but to hear, something shifts. The echo changes because we do. This is the essence of Zen reflection, not solving, but witnessing. Psychological reflection. In modern psychology, this dynamic is known as projection, attributing one's own unacceptable thoughts or feelings to someone else. Carl Jung famously wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Ryota's transformation comes not from external correction, but from inner realization. The valley becomes a mirror of his unconscious. What he cannot admit to himself returns through his own voice, giving him space to pause, to question, to shift. This also echoes, no pun intended, the principles of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, creating space between stimulus and response so we can see the root of our reactivity, not just the surface behavior. When Ryota begins to whisper, he enters vulnerability. And only then does the echo respond differently. Not all silence is emptiness. Some silence is the soul's response, finally being heard. Closing reflection. In the Itivuttaka, the Buddha said, "As an echo follows the sound, as a shadow follows the body, so suffering follows unwise thought." And in Zen poetry, I called across the valley. It answered not with words, but with who I was. Tonight, find a quiet place, ask yourself, not aloud, but deeply, what have I been shouting into the world? And what has it been echoing back? Then listen. Beneath the repetition, beneath the noise, there may be a gentler voice, your own. Let it rise like an echo through stillness. Let it teach you how to speak again. Story 8. The Dying Tree and the Blooming Weed. In the courtyard of the Temple of Still Winds, there once stood a majestic Bodhi tree. Its roots were vast, its trunk wide enough to shelter 2 monks from the rain, and its leaves whispered even when there was no wind. Generations had meditated beneath its shade, believing the tree itself had absorbed the echoes of countless awakenings. It was not just a tree, it was a teacher. The monks called it Daiju, meaning great shelter. Children from the nearby village would run to the temple gates just to glimpse it, to toss coins into its roots and make wishes. When visitors came from distant provinces, they bowed not only to the Buddha but to the tree itself. Its presence carried something ancient, unmoved. But one spring, the leaves began to fall too early, not gently, but in sudden waves. The green faded to brown overnight. Birds no longer nested there. The bark cracked. The branches began to bend, not in grace, but in collapse. The abbot, a monk named Shinyo, watched in silence. "It is dying," a novice whispered. Shinyo only nodded. The other monks suggested remedies: soil tests, water rituals, chants, fertilizer from the eastern valley, but nothing helped. The tree continued to wither. Soon, visitors stopped coming. The children did not return. The courtyard felt hollow. And then, one morning, something strange happened. A small green weed appeared, right at the base of Daiju's dying roots. It was unremarkable. Spindly, a little crooked, its leaves rough and jagged. No one paid attention to it. One monk even tried to pluck it out, thinking it a nuisance. But Shinyo stopped him. "Let it grow," he said. The monk blinked. "But it's just a weed." Shinyo smiled. "So was the Bodhi tree once." Weeks passed, the tree continued to fade, but the weed thrived. It grew taller, then wider. It sprouted tiny yellow flowers that opened at dawn and closed at dusk. Bees came, butterflies hovered. The air, once stagnant, now shimmered with small life. One afternoon, as the monks swept the courtyard, Shinyo asked them to sit. He pointed at Daiju, bare, skeletal, solemn. "What do you see?" he asked. "Loss," said one monk. "Decay," said another. "A symbol of impermanence," said a third. Shinyo nodded, then pointed to the weed. "And here?" "Something small," someone murmured. Shinyo waited. "Something trying," said the youngest monk. Shinyo smiled. "Exactly. Something trying." That evening, he spoke to the monks under the setting sun. "We have worshipped this tree for decades," he said, "but perhaps we confused its stillness for permanence. We thought it would always give us shelter. We forgot that even great things die." Silence hung in the courtyard like incense. "But death," Shinyo continued, "is not the end of teaching. Sometimes a weed blooms where a giant falls, not to mock it, but to remind us. Life does not stop growing." He bowed to the tree and then, more deeply, to the weed. The dying tree remained in the courtyard for another year before it was taken down, respectfully, branch by branch. Its wood was used to carve meditation benches and prayer beads. Its roots were left untouched. The weed, it kept growing, it flowered every spring, and it was never given a name, not because it was unworthy, but because it had no need for one. It had already taught what it came to teach. Commentary. This story invites us to confront our relationship with endings, not only of life, but of symbols, traditions, identities. The Bodhi tree, like all things revered, eventually dies. Its greatness does not protect it from decay. But Zen teaches us to look again. What seems like ruin may be the very soil from which something else, quieter and smaller, takes root. We often overlook the weed in our lives, the unnoticed growth, the humble change, the unexpected strength that arises not from triumph, but from loss. We mourn what is large and forget to kneel beside what is new. The weed is not a replacement for the tree, it is a continuation, a whisper that says, "I'm still here, try again." psychological reflection. This story mirrors how we respond to loss, especially symbolic loss, a career that ends, a role that shifts, a belief system that no longer fits. Psychologists call it identity disintegration. We attach to things, status, relationships, structures, as part of who we are. When those things die, it feels like we do too. But often, in the rubble of what once defined us, a small part of us starts to bloom. That small growth may feel unworthy at first. I'm not who I used to be, but it doesn't have to be. Healing isn't about recreating the tree. It's about honoring the weed. Therapist and author Francis Weller calls grief a form of praise. In grieving the great, we also make space for the small. And in that space, life returns. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, all compounded things are subject to vanish. Strive with diligence. And in a Zen koan, when the great oak falls, the moss keeps growing. Tonight, close your eyes and imagine something in your life that has died, or is dying. A dream, a role, a way of being. Now ask gently, what small thing has begun to grow in its place? Can I bow to that too? Let the giant fall, let the weed rise, and remember, even the smallest bloom is part of the Dharma. Story 9. The Woman with Too Many Lamps. In the center of a bustling seaside town lived a woman named Ayame, who was known by everyone and understood by no one. She owned the largest house on the hill. It had many rooms, and in every room, a lamp. Tall lamps, glass lamps, brass lamps, oil lamps, paper lanterns from Kyoto, antique European sconces, flickering Himalayan salt orbs. Some lamps were purely decorative, never lit. Others glowed all night, even when no one was there to see. People called her eccentric. She never married, never hosted guests. But each week, without fail, she went to the marketplace and bought another lamp. Sometimes, too, she was quiet, polite, her smile brief, her eyes distant. Children said she used to be a singer, or a dancer, or maybe something grander, but she had stopped long ago. The truth was, no one knew. But everyone noticed. Her house, no matter the season or weather, was always lit. And yet, it never felt warm. One autumn, a monk named Tetsu came through the town on pilgrimage. He walked with no shoes, a shaved head, and a robe that carried the scent of rain and time. He bowed to trees, to dogs, to beggars and shopkeepers. He spoke little, but his silence was kind. The townspeople welcomed him. They offered rice, old futons, advice. One evening, as he sat under the lanterns by the harbour, someone mentioned Ayame. She has more lamps than anyone in the country, they said, but she never lights the one thing that matters, her heart. There was laughter, then a pause. Perhaps she's afraid of the dark, someone else murmured. Tetsu looked up. Or perhaps, he said softly, she believes the light must come from outside. The next day, he climbed the hill. He knocked on her door. Ayame opened it, eyebrows raised. She was not used to visitors, but she was polite. "Monk," she said, "what brings you?" Tetsu bowed. "I heard you collect light." She hesitated. "I collect lamps." "Same thing." He smiled. She stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the house gleamed. Lamps on every shelf, every ledge. Some humming with soft amber glow, others quiet, cold. The air smelled faintly of old paper and lavender oil. Tetsu walked slowly, reverently, as if in a temple. "You live among light," he said. Ayame nodded. "I find comfort in it." "Do you sleep with them on?" She hesitated. "Yes." He nodded. "Are you afraid of the dark?" She looked away. "I don't know." They sat in a parlor surrounded by curved glass lamps. Tetsu poured the tea she offered. He waited. Then he asked, "When did the collecting begin?" She blinked. "After my sister died," she said, surprising even herself. "She was the last of my family, the last person who knew me before the world knew me. I used to perform, theaters, cities. I thought I loved it. But when she died, the lights on stage didn't mean anything. I quit. I couldn't bear the dark, so I brought light into every room." Tetsu nodded gently. "Did it help?" She looked around, then lowered her gaze. "It kept me company." He smiled, but not unkindly. "There is a lamp within," he said. "But it cannot be bought. It cannot be placed on a table. It only lights when you sit with the darkness long enough to see that it was never empty." Ayame swallowed. "But I don't want to be in the dark." "No one does," Tetsu said. "But the sun always rises from night, not from another sun." That evening she did something she hadn't done in years. She turned off the lamps, one by one, room by room, until her house was quiet, still, bare. She sat alone in the dark. At first, it was unbearable. The silence roared. The shadows pulsed. Her memories crowded the corners. She thought she heard her sister's voice, her own voice, younger, singing on distant stages. She wanted to turn the lights back on, but she didn't. She breathed. She waited, and then something strange happened. She noticed the faint glow from the window, moonlight, untouched, undemanding. She saw the shape of her hand in the dark. She heard her heartbeat, and for the first time in years, she realized she was still here. The next morning, the townspeople noticed a change. Her windows were open. Not all the lights were on. And Ayame stood on her front steps, barefoot, smiling at the breeze. She did not buy any lamps that week. Instead, she brought a single candle to the temple and left it by the statue of Kannon, the Bodhisattva of compassion. It burned for an hour. Then it went out. But the warmth stayed. Commentary. This story touches a subtle but powerful truth. We often surround ourselves with substitutes for what we truly need. Ayame collects lamps, not because she loves light, but because she fears the dark. Her house becomes a metaphor for a soul padded against grief, silence, and memory. But light that is bought, controlled, curated, cannot reach the places within us that ache for meaning. Zen does not reject light, but it honors darkness as sacred, too. It knows that sometimes true illumination comes not from brightness, but from presence within the shadow. Ayame's transformation is not dramatic. It is gentle, a turning inward, a willingness to sit with what hurts. And from that quiet encounter, something real begins to glow, not from the walls, but from within. Psychological reflection. In modern therapy, this is called avoidance coping, the strategy of filling life with distractions, comforts, or safe rituals to avoid pain. While such strategies may reduce short-term discomfort, they also block access to deeper healing. Ayame's lamps are like our achievements, possessions, routines. They create a sense of control. But beneath them, the unresolved hurt waits quietly. Trauma. Work, especially in somatic and mindfulness-based approaches, encourages safe, supported exposure to the darkness, not to drown in it, but to reclaim what lives there. Unprocessed grief, dormant vitality, lost voice. Only when Ayame turns off the lamps can she feel the night as it is, intact, not terrifying. She meets herself again. Closing reflection. The Buddha said, just as a lamp cannot burn without oil, so a person cannot live without inner fire. And in Zen, when the candle is gone, do not seek another. Sit and let your eyes adjust. Tonight, ask yourself, what lamps have I surrounded myself with? Can I allow just one room to be dark, just for a while? Sit there, not as punishment, but as pilgrimage. In the dark, the breath is brighter, the soul is closer, and the light that rises from within never needs to be bought. Story 10. The Boy Who Fed the Demons. In a mist-covered village, at the edge of the northern forests, there lived a boy named Nari. His mother said he was born during a thunderstorm and that the lightning had kissed his heart. She meant it as a blessing. But Nari was not so sure. From a young age, he had dreams. Loud, vivid, terrifying. Shadows crept across his walls at night. Voices murmured in languages he didn't understand. And sometimes he would wake with tears in his eyes and no memory of why. Don't worry, his mother would whisper. They're just dreams. But they weren't. Because when Nari was alone, the shadows spoke to him. At first they were blurry, shapes behind doors, flickers in the window. Then they became more precise, faces, figures, some small, like children with hollow eyes, some tall and thin, their limbs too long, their mouths too wide. But they never touched him, they only stared. They came when he was angry, when he felt ashamed, when he wished someone would disappear, and most of all, they came when he felt alone. He tried to ignore them. He prayed, he meditated. He even told the village priest once, who frowned and handed him a talisman, saying, "Keep this near your bed." But the shadows didn't care. One night, after a fight with his mother, Nari ran into the forest. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he couldn't stay. The trees swallowed him whole. The air was thick, and when the moon rose, so did the shadows. This time, they didn't wait. They circled him. They whispered, "You are broken. You will never be enough. No one wants you." He fell to his knees, covered his ears, screamed, but the voices only laughed. And then, an old man appeared. He wore robes the color of soot and dawn. His beard was white moss. His eyes were black stones that had watched many winters. He said nothing at first. He only looked at Nari and then at the shadows. "You brought them," he said. Nari shook his head. "They follow me." "No," the old man said gently. "They grow from you." He sat down on a nearby rock, opened a small cloth bundle. Inside were 3 warm steamed buns. He broke one in half, placed it on a leaf, and slid it toward the shadows. At first, they recoiled. Then, hesitantly, one stepped forward, took it. The others followed. They sat, awkwardly, silently, around the boy, eating. Nari watched in disbelief. "Why are you feeding them?" "Because they're hungry," the old man said. "And what we do not feed with compassion, we feed with fear." The old man's name was Mugen. He lived alone in a stone hut deeper in the forest, though he did not call it alone. "The demons live here too," he said, smiling. I used to fight them. Then I fed them. Each night, Mugen invited Nari to place food outside the hut, a bit of rice or tea or sweet chestnuts. And each night the shadows came. Sometimes they hissed, sometimes they sobbed, sometimes they merely stared. But over time, they changed. They began to bow. They began to speak less. They began to leave before sunrise. Mugen explained, "These are not enemies. These are the parts of you exiled by shame, fear, anger. You call them demons, but they are your own forgotten selves, trying to come home." Nari began to understand. When he felt rage, a tall demon would appear, red-eyed, fists clenched. When he felt guilt, a small one came, shaking, silent. And when he felt nothing, a shadow came that looked exactly like him. "I don't want them," Nari whispered once. Mugen smiled. "That doesn't matter. They already want you." One day, Mugen gave Nari a wooden bowl. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will return to your village." Nari flinched. "But the shadows." "Will follow," Mugen nodded. "But now you can feed them." He handed him the last steamed bun. "Not for them," he said. "For you." Nari returned. He no longer slept with a talisman. He kept the bowl by his window, placing a crumb in it each night. The shadows still came, but they sat outside now, quiet, waiting. Sometimes he spoke to them. Sometimes he just breathed. But he no longer feared them, because he knew they were not there to haunt him. They were waiting to be held. Commentary. This story walks us into the heart of one of Zen's deepest recognitions. Our demons are not enemies. They are invitations. Nari begins in fear, as most of us do, fearing the emotions and thoughts that disturb us. We call them names: anxiety, rage, trauma, shame. We push them away. We distract. We numb. We fight. But Zen turns toward the old master, Mugen, models what in Mahāyāna teachings is known as compassionate turning. He does not banish the shadows. He offers them a seat. He doesn't control. He feeds. The transformation is not in the shadow. It is in Nari's relationship to it. Fear becomes curiosity. Judgment becomes inclusion. And in that shift, healing begins. Psychological reflection. From a psychological standpoint, this story beautifully illustrates Part's work, an approach found in internal family systems, IFS, which sees the psyche as made up of subpersonalities or parts. Many of these parts carry wounds, fears, and extreme beliefs. In IFS, we do not try to eliminate these parts. We turn toward them with compassion and curiosity. We ask them what they need. We witness them without merging with them. Mugen's act of feeding the demons mirrors this practice. Modern neuroscience also tells us that fear circuits in the brain calm not by suppression, but by safe exposure, by allowing ourselves to feel without being overwhelmed. Nari's journey is every human's journey, moving from reactivity to relationship. When we feed what we fear with presence, it stops hungering for our attention in the dark. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Dhammapada, hatred is never appeased by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. And a Zen saying reminds us, the demon you fear most is the gatekeeper to your own temple. Tonight, ask gently, what shadow keeps returning to me? Have I tried to fight it or feed it with understanding? Close your eyes. Imagine offering it a warm bun, a seat, a name. You don't have to love it, but perhaps you can listen. And in that listening, a gate may open, not to cast it out, but to let yourself in. Story 11. The moon on the water does not tremble. High in the mountains, where the clouds drift low and time seems to move slower than breath, there was a small temple beside a lake. The lake was shallow, yet still. The monk said that it reflected the moon better than any mirror. On full moon nights they would sit in silence and watch the silver orb ripple across the water's surface, not as entertainment, but as practice. The temple's youngest novice, Kaito, was troubled. He was diligent, always, the first to rise, the last to rest. His robes were always folded, his bow always deep, his chanting always precise, but his heart was rarely still. He tried to conceal it, but in meditation, his thoughts whirled. In chores, his mind raced. He smiled outwardly, but inside, there was always a storm. Worries, comparisons, frustration, memories he couldn't explain. And worst of all, he envied the others. They seemed so calm, so undisturbed, especially the abbot, Master Enso. The old monk moved like water itself, slow, soft, unfazed. Whether a cup broke or a guest arrived late, his demeanor never shifted. Kaito couldn't understand it. "Don't you ever feel angry?" he asked one morning after Enso had responded to a rude visitor with nothing but a nod. "Of course," the master said, "but you didn't show it." Enso looked at him, eyes kind. "The moon," he said, "does not tremble on its own. Only the water does." That night, Kaito couldn't sleep. He went down to the lake. The moon hung low and bright, cradled by the stillness of the surface. It looked flawless, almost close enough to touch. He picked up a stone and tossed it. Ripples scattered the moon's image into 1,000 fragments. He waited. Slowly, the waves subsided. The moon returned, whole. The next morning, Kaito approached the abbot again. "Master," he said, "I understand now. The water is my mind. The moon is peace?" Enso sipped his tea. "Perhaps," he said, "but don't rush to name things. The truth doesn't need labels. It only needs to be seen." Kaito nodded slowly. "But how do I keep the water from trembling?" The master smiled. "You don't." This confused him. He had thought the goal was to be calm, to empty the mind, to erase disturbance. But then what's the point of meditation? He asked later during walking practice. Enso paused mid-step. "To see the water clearly," he said, "even when it trembles." Over the following weeks, Kaito began to shift his focus. He stopped trying to stop his thoughts. Instead, he watched them, like ripples on the lake. He noticed how quickly he reacted to small things. A cup placed unevenly, a door creaking, a word from another monk. Each reaction was a stone in the water. Each time the moon trembled. But gradually, he learned not to throw more stones. He learned to breathe, to wait, to trust that the image would return, not because he forced it, but because the water, by nature, settles. One evening, a fierce wind swept across the mountain. The trees bent, roof tiles rattled, the lake churned. Kaito rushed to secure the storeroom, then ran down to check. The lake, it was wild, waves crashing against the rocks, the moon nowhere to be seen. He felt a pang of sadness. It looked so broken, so lost. But then he remembered. The moon itself had not changed. Only the reflection had. He sat beneath the storm, wet, cold, still. Hours passed, the wind softened, the water quieted, and the moon returned as whole as ever. Commentary. This story touches the core of Zen meditation, not as a technique to control the mind, but as a path of seeing clearly, even amidst disturbance. Kaito's early struggle is familiar to many. He mistakes tranquility for suppression. He believes that being spiritual means being unshakable, unaffected. But Master Enso teaches a deeper truth. We are not the ripples. We are the awareness that sees them. In this view, emotions, thoughts, and reactions are not failures. They are part of the lake. The goal is not to eliminate them, but to become so familiar with their arising that we no longer mistake them for the whole. And the moon? It never changes. It's always there, waiting to be seen. Psychological reflection. In contemporary psychology, this principle mirrors practices in mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and acceptance-based therapies. The idea is not to suppress thoughts or emotions, but to observe them without attachment. Dr. John Kabat-Zinn defines mindfulness as paying attention, on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. Kaito learns this through experience. When he stops fighting the ripples, they resolve on their own. His growing ability to hold space for internal storms without reacting is what cultivates true peace. This reflects the window of tolerance model in trauma-informed therapy. We learn to expand our capacity to stay present, even when uncomfortable. States arise. Peace, then, is not the absence of disturbance. It is the presence of presence. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Sutta Nipata, "As a deep lake is clear and still, so the wise become clear upon hearing the Dharma." And a Zen poem offers, "The moon does not stop shining when the puddle is stirred. Tonight, sit quietly. Ask yourself, what in me is the water? What in me is the moon? Let the thoughts come. Let the emotions move. Watch them ripple. Then, wait. When the water settles, look again. You may see yourself reflected, whole, undisturbed, not because the world is calm, but because you no longer need it to be." Story 12. The Temple of 10,000 Doors. There is a temple in the eastern mountains that no one can enter the same way twice. Not because it is hidden, not because it moves, but because its gates are many, 10,000 to be precise. Wooden, iron, stone, bamboo, some carved with flowers, others blank as silence, some so small you must crawl, others so tall you cannot see their top, all led to the same courtyard, and yet, depending on which door you enter, you see the temple differently. The locals call it Senmonji, the Temple of 10,000 Doors. Travelers come from far to marvel at it, but most leave confused, except for one young woman named Hana. Hana arrived in the middle of summer, carrying little more than a satchel and an ache. She had lost her job. Her relationship had ended. Her father had passed. Her body was tired, and her spirit was thinner than rice paper. She wasn't looking for enlightenment. She just wanted to stop spinning. She had heard rumors of a strange temple, a place where people found clarity, or at least a kind of rest. She didn't know if it was real. She didn't care. All she knew was that something had to change. When she reached the base of the mountain, a monk greeted her without words. He simply gestured toward the slope and bowed. She climbed. It took most of the day. By sunset, she stood before the walls, high, weathered, vine-covered, and there they were, doors. Stretching as far as the eye could see, she approached the closest one. Simple, wooden, with a faded lotus carved in the center. She touched the handle. It was warm. She opened it. Inside was the temple courtyard. Stone paths, koi pond, a bell tower, and monks moving in stillness. She stepped through. The door vanished behind her. For the next week, she lived in silence. She swept. She sat. She ate simply. She walked slowly. But something tugged at her. It wasn't the temple itself. It was the feeling that she hadn't really entered yet. That she was still outside herself, going through motions. On the 8th day, a monk handed her a small slip of paper with 4 words. Try another door tomorrow. So she did. This time, she found a rusted iron door hidden beneath ivy. It creaked when she opened it. The courtyard looked the same, yet it didn't. The shadows fell differently. The air was cooler. The same monks moved, but now they seemed farther, away, like she was observing from a distance. She stayed again, meditated, worked. Then another note appeared. Try again. And so it continued. Each day, a new door. Each day, the same temple, but shifted. Sometimes the birds sang louder. Sometimes the wind moved backward. Sometimes the bell didn't ring. Sometimes she felt deep peace. Sometimes unbearable restlessness. One day, she entered through a door carved with a mirror. The temple was empty. No monks. No sound. Just her reflection in the pond. Blurred. Changing. She sat down and cried for hours. She didn't know why. Or maybe she did. On her final day, a monk handed her a small wooden box. Inside, a single key. Use it to open any door, he said. She walked the perimeter, key in hand, searching. But this time, she wasn't drawn to any of the ornate or mysterious gates. Instead, she found a plain door, half covered in moss, barely taller than a child. She had passed it dozens of times without seeing it. She inserted the key. The door opened, but this time there was no courtyard, only a mirror, and behind the mirror, herself, just herself, looking, breathing, nothing hidden, nothing added, just Hana. She stayed in that stillness for a long time. Then she stepped through, and the door did not close, because it was never a door at all. Commentary. The Temple of 10,000 Doors is a living metaphor for the mind and its endless reactions. Each door is a response, a way of seeing, framing, interpreting the same reality. The temple never changes, but the entry point does. We think peace lies in changing circumstances, but Zen reminds us the outer temple is constant. The transformation happens in the way we enter each moment. Hana's journey reflects this. At first, she seeks comfort, then novelty, then answers, but gradually she stops looking for the right door and starts noticing the one that reflects her most deeply. This is the door of true presence. The doorless door. Psychological reflection. In cognitive psychology, this story reflects the theory of framing, how our perception of a situation determines our emotional response more than the situation itself. In dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, one learns to hold multiple truths at once. A moment can be sad and peaceful. A person can be wrong and doing their best. We suffer not from events, but from rigidity, in how we enter them. Hana learns flexibility, and eventually, she learns the ultimate truth in mindfulness-based therapy. There is no perfect entry. There is only presence. And in presence, every door is the right one. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Vimuttimagga, "The mind is the forerunner of all states. With the mind alone, one builds a world." And a Zen verse says, "The door opens when no door is sought." Tonight, imagine yourself before a wall of many doors. Ask, which doorway have I entered this day through? Anger, fear, craving, hope. Can I enter the next moment with stillness instead? And if you find a mirror behind the door, don't be afraid. You've just found the temple. Story 13. The Man Who Ran from Emptiness. Long ago, in a city of towers and trades, where the streets thrummed with the noise of carts and coin, there lived a man named Kenji who could not sit still. He was always building, his schedule, his image, his reputation, always reaching new projects, new positions, new applause. He was the kind of man whose presence filled a room, not with warmth but with motion. He feared only one thing: stillness. The silence between meetings unnerved him. Weekends without a task list made him anxious. Even in meditation, he found himself clenching his jaw, waiting for the bell to ring so he could move again. He called it ambition. His friends called it drive. But one old monk, whom he visited out of curiosity during a retreat, called it something else. "Ah," the monk said with a quiet smile. "You're afraid of emptiness." Kenji frowned. "I'm not afraid of anything," the monk nodded, unconvinced. "Then why are you always running?" Kenji laughed nervously. "I'm not running. I'm progressing." The monk looked into his tea. "Progress is only sacred," he said, "when you know what you're walking away from." That night, Kenji could not sleep. The monk's words rang louder than traffic ever had. He thought of all the years he had filled, all the achievements, the routines, the networks, all the motions that had given his life meaning, or at least momentum. And then a strange thought appeared. What would happen if I stopped? The next morning, he didn't go to the market. He didn't check his calendar. He walked, out of the village, past the orchards, toward the hills. His feet, unsure at first, seemed to remember a rhythm older than appointments. By dusk, he arrived at a clearing with a single bench. It overlooked a vast meadow with no houses, no signs, no reception, and for the first time in years, Kenji sat without a reason. No podcast, no reading, just breath and space. It didn't take long for the restlessness to return. He fidgeted, thought about emails, thought about groceries, wondered how long it had been, thought about thinking, then the fear. It rose not from outside, but inside, a creeping hollowness, as if something beneath his ribs had opened. It wasn't painful, but it was terrifying. It was emptiness, and in panic he stood. He almost ran, but a voice, his own, but softer, whispered, "Stay." He sat again, trembling, breathing. The feeling deepened, not darkness, not numbness, just space. As if everything he had built inside, opinions, goals, titles, had been gently removed. He wept, not because he was sad, but because he realized how long he had been running from this vast, wordless presence that had been waiting for him all along. He stayed in the clearing until morning, and when he returned to the city, something had changed. He didn't quit his job. He didn't shave his head. He still used email, but between meetings, He sat, sometimes only for a breath, sometimes for 5 minutes. Not to plan, not to escape, but to feel the silence beneath the sound. And when his friends asked why he seemed calmer, he smiled and said, "I finally stopped being afraid of nothing." Commentary. This story reveals a central paradox of the spiritual path. What we call emptiness is often the very fullness we've been searching for. Kenji's fear is not unusual. In modern life, we equate doing with worth. Stillness feels like stagnation. Emptiness feels like failure, but Zen sees it differently. Emptiness, shunyata in Sanskrit, is not a void. It is the open space where ego dissolves and true awareness arises. Kenji is not called to abandon his life. He is called to inhabit it differently, from presence, not panic. And in that shift, he discovers something radical. There is nothing missing, only something uncovered. Psychological reflection. In psychology, Kenji's avoidance reflects experiential avoidance, the tendency to escape uncomfortable internal states, thoughts, emotions, sensations, through distraction, productivity, or numbing behaviors. This avoidance, though normalized in our culture, leads to exhaustion and disconnection, acceptance and commitment. Therapy, ACT, teaches clients to make space for uncomfortable inner experiences rather than fighting them. Stillness is not the enemy. It is the doorway to integration. Kenji's encounter with emptiness is a moment of existential exposure, a raw, unfiltered experience of being without the scaffolding of identity. Many fear this, but those who remain with it discover not despair, but a deeper ground of peace. Stillness does not erase the self. It reveals what was never dependent on self to begin with. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Sutta Nipata, "There is no fire like passion, no grip like delusion, no net like craving, no river like desire. But there is also a place where none of these flow." And a Zen saying echoes, "Emptiness is not empty. It is the fullness of what cannot be grasped." Tonight, find 5 minutes. Turn off your screens. Set down your thoughts. Sit with nothing but breath. Ask softly, what is this emptiness I keep avoiding? And what might happen if I simply let it be? You may tremble. You may resist. But stay. And in that stillness, you may hear something older than thought. The quiet voice that says, "You are not missing anything." Story 14. The child who asked where karma sleeps. In a small village wrapped in rice fields and the scent of wood smoke, there lived a child named Yui who asked strange questions. She did not speak much, but when she did, her words stirred the air like a riddle unfolding itself. Her mother would say, "Yui, eat your rice," and she would reply, "Where does hunger go when it leaves?" Her grandfather would teach her how to sweep the yard, and she would pause to ask, "Do the leaves feel us pushing them?" The villagers smiled gently. They thought her odd, but harmless. Just a child with a moon-shaped mind. But one morning, after watching a neighbor curse and kick a stray dog, then walk away whistling, Yui asked a question that no one knew how to answer. She looked up at her grandfather and said, "Where does karma sleep when no one is watching?" The old man froze. He had lived through wars and harvests, losses and celebrations. He had offered incense to Buddhas, given coins to monks, and whispered mantras into his bowl of tea. But never, not once, had he thought to ask where karma rested. He cleared his throat. "It doesn't sleep," he said. "But the man was cruel," Yui replied. And then he smiled. He looked happy. The old man nodded slowly. "Perhaps karma is slow." Yui tilted her head. "So where does it wait?" That night, the old man went to the temple. He lit incense, bowed 3 times, and sat before the old abbot, a quiet man named Ryoshin, who was said to have memorized every sutra, but rarely quoted any of them. He told the abbot of Yui's question. The abbot listened with his eyes half closed. After a long pause, he said, "Tell the girl, karma sleeps in your hands, in your voice, in your gaze. It does not wait behind clouds to strike. It waits inside us to wake." The next morning, the grandfather told Yui what the abbot had said. She was quiet for a while, then whispered, "So, I carry it?" He nodded. "And so does everyone." She looked down at her small hands. "Even me?" He smiled. "Especially you." The weeks passed. Yui became quiet in a different way. Not distant, but attentive. She began watching the village, not just for what people did, but for what echoed after. She noticed how the old man who scolded children always walked with clenched fists, how the woman who gossiped most cried when no one was around, how the boy, who once stole from the shrine, now offered food to the temple cat each morning. She saw that karma did not always come as lightning or illness, punishment or reward. Sometimes it came as restlessness, sometimes as guilt, sometimes as the slow erosion of joy, and sometimes, just sometimes, it came as peace. Not because a person was good, but because they had stopped pretending to be anything else. One afternoon, Yui found a broken cicada shell beneath the cherry tree. She held it gently. A neighbor boy walked by. "That's dead," he said. Yui smiled. "No, it just moved on." He rolled his eyes and left. She stayed, holding the fragile husk, and whispered, "Maybe karma sleeps in this too." Years passed. Yui grew. People forgot her questions, but they didn't forget her presence. She became a healer, not of bodies, but of hearts. She never called herself that. She simply listened more than she spoke. When people wept, she didn't rush to soothe them. When people confessed, she didn't judge. When people lashed out, she often just looked at them, eyes soft, and said, "That must be heavy." And somehow, in her presence, people softened. Some said she was lucky. Some said she was wise. But if you had asked her, she would say, "Karma is always here." Most people just forget they're holding it. Commentary. This story unwraps the often misunderstood concept of karma. To many, karma is imagined as a cosmic balance sheet. Do good, receive good. Do bad, face punishment. But in Zen and early Buddhist teachings, karma is not about external justice. It is about cause and effect, not across lifetimes necessarily, but across moments. Every word we speak shapes the next. Every thought we cling to seeds a pattern. Karma is not a god watching from afar. It is the subtle imprint of our choices, on others and on ourselves. Yui's question reframes karma not as a distant force, but as an intimate companion, something that sleeps within our intentions, waiting for us to notice. Psychological reflection. Modern psychology, especially within cognitive behavioral and interpersonal therapies, echoes this insight. Our thoughts, emotions, and actions do not exist in isolation. They create patterns in our brains, our relationships, and our behaviors. These patterns become our lived experience. This is karma in practice. Resentment, unspoken, becomes illness. Repeated judgment becomes disconnection. Avoided guilt becomes anxiety. And compassion, even offered once, becomes a thread of healing. Yui's observation that karma is not loud but lingering mirrors the way trauma or kindness echo quietly in the nervous system. We don't always notice when karma arrives, but we feel it in the way our shoulders tense, in the way our words land, in the silence we keep or break. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Anguttara Nikaya, intention, I tell you, is karma. Intending, one does karma by way of body, speech, and mind, and a Zen saying follows, you need not chase karma. You are walking with it already. Tonight, ask yourself, what am I planting with my words, my silence, my gaze? If karma is sleeping in my hands, what will I awaken it with? Let this not be a question of fear, but one of tenderness. Your smallest gesture may become someone else's memory. Your quietest act may be karma, gently waking. Choose well. Choose kindly. And you may find that karma is not chasing you, but bowing beside you, step for step. Story 15. The Fisherman and the Cloud. In a coastal village shaped by wind and salt, there lived a fisherman named Tai Chi who had never once caught what he truly sought. Each morning before the sun rose, he would drag his net to the shore, push his small boat into the waves, and row until the village disappeared behind sea mist. He fished not for food, nor even for trade. He fished for something he could not name. The villagers knew him as quiet, reliable, always alone. Children whispered that he spoke to the clouds. Old women said his wife had died, and he was still searching for her spirit among the tides. No one asked him directly. No one ever does when grief has aged into myth. But the truth was this. Tai Chi was chasing a cloud. It had happened when he was a boy. One afternoon, during a long, hot summer, he had sat alone on the shore, watching the horizon dissolve into sky, and there, floating just above the sea, was a single white cloud shaped like a giant fish, long, arching, luminous, moving slowly across the water's reflection. He had never seen anything more perfect. He remembered thinking, if I could catch that, I'd never want anything else again. It was a child's thought, but it stayed. And years later, even when his nets were full of real fish, he found no satisfaction. His eyes always drifted upward, waiting for that shape to return. He began to row farther, stay out longer, not to find fish, but to find the thing that once made his heart pause. The perfect cloud. Seasons passed. Villagers married, aged, moved away. But Tai Chi remained, his face browned by sun, his hands knotted by rope and salt, his eyes always scanning the sky. Then one evening, after decades of watching, he saw it. It was near dusk. The sea was calm, the sky streaked with saffron and ash, and there, just above the horizon, hung a cloud, long, curved, smooth, a fish in the heavens, not imagined, not mistaken. His heart pounded. He stood in his boat, trembling, and then he threw his net into the air. The net arced, caught nothing, and fell back into the sea with a slap. The cloud drifted on, untouched. Tai Chi fell to his knees. He did not weep. He simply watched. and for the first time in his life, he noticed the color of the sky behind the cloud, the softness of the breeze, the weight of his own breath. He watched until the cloud dissolved into dusk. Then he turned the boat toward home. He returned to the village and did something no one expected. He gave away his nets. He offered his boat to a younger fisherman. He walked to the temple, sat on the steps, and stayed. People asked why. He only smiled. "There's nothing wrong with fishing," he said, "but sometimes the thing you chase isn't meant to be caught. It's meant to show you how far you'll go before you notice you're already home." Commentary. This story gently exposes a universal human pattern, the search for something, just out of reach, whether it's success, love, meaning, validation, or peace. We often pursue these things like Tai Chi pursued the cloud, not because they are necessary, but because they once made us feel something we never forgot. Zen calls this the hungry ghost, the part of us that is never full, always scanning, always chasing, not out of greed, but from an echo of longing. Tai Chi's realization is not that the cloud was meaningless. On the contrary, it guided him. But its purpose was not to be caught. It was to awaken him to the present, to the breath, to the water under his feet. Some desires lead us in circles, others lead us home. Psychological reflection. In modern psychology, Tai Chi's journey resembles what is known as arrival fallacy, the belief that happiness will come once we achieve a specific goal. I'll be at peace when I get the promotion, when I lose the weight, when I find love. But often, the achievement arrives and the emptiness remains. This is not because we are broken. It is because we misunderstood the nature of satisfaction. Existential therapy speaks to this, that fulfillment is not in external objects, but in how fully we engage with being. Tai Chi's cloud becomes a metaphor for the projected perfect state we chase. The moment he stops grasping and simply witnesses, he reconnects with his own breath, body, and life. This is not resignation. It is awakening, closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Dhammapada, "There is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path." And a Zen teaching offers, only when you stop chasing does the moon reflect clearly in the water. Tonight, sit with this question. What cloud have I been trying to catch? Can I allow it to pass without needing to possess it? Place your hand on your chest. Feel the breath. Let longing soften into presence. You are not late. You are not empty. The sky has always been enough. Story 16. The monk who forgot his name. There once lived a monk in a mountain temple who forgot his own name, not from age, nor illness, nor spell, but from something quieter, something closer to freedom. His fellow monks noticed it slowly. At first, he answered questions with a pause. Then he began signing his chores with a small drawing of a leaf, instead of the name he was given at ordination. When asked to chant his part in sutra service, he did so, but without introducing himself, as was customary. Finally, during a festival when monks exchanged simple calligraphy gifts, he handed the abbot a blank scroll. "What is this?" the abbot asked gently. The monk bowed and said, "My name." He had not always been so absent from himself. His lay name had been Kenji. His Dharma name was Shunyo, which meant emptiness. He had entered the monastery after losing everything in a house fire, his shop, his parents, his plans. He had come not seeking God, but peace. He found it slowly, in sweeping leaves, in carrying water, in long hours of zazen. But still, in his early years as a monk, he clung tightly to his name. It became his new identity, the robe of his self. People would bow and say, "Ah, Brother Shunyo," and he would feel something warm in the recognition. But then, one day, something shifted. He had been assigned to copy the Heart Sutra by hand. As he wrote, he reached the line, "Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form." His brush slipped. The word emptiness bled into form. He paused, he stared, and something in him dissolved. He realized that for all his efforts to become someone new, to perfect the identity of a monk, he had only traded one mask for another. Shunyo was not him. Kenji was not him. Neither name could contain what moved beneath the silence. From that day forward, he stopped naming things. And over time, his own name faded from memory. Not as a loss, but as a letting go. People came to hear him speak. They asked, "How can I stop feeling so heavy?" He would hold up a mirror and say, "Put down the one you're trying to polish." They asked, "How do I find myself?" He smiled. "Stop looking for a shape." They asked, "Who are you?" He laughed. "I'm whoever you need me to be," he said, "but I am not mine." Years later, when the abbot lay dying, he called the nameless monk to his side. "You've gone farther than most," the abbot said, voice thin as rice paper. "But tell me, what did you find when your name disappeared?" The monk took his hand and whispered, "A silence that answers before the question is asked." He died many years later, in the shade of a plum tree during a spring drizzle. No grave marked his name. Only a stone, smooth and empty, sat at the temple gate. The young monks who touched it said it felt warm somehow. And when asked who it honored, the elders only said, "No one, and everyone." Commentary. This story leads us into the deep Zen territory of non-self, the insight that identity is not a fixed thing, but a fluid process, shaped by attachment, memory, fear, and desire. The monks, forgetting is not dysfunction, it is liberation. In Zen, names are useful, but they are not truth. The self we construct, through labels, roles, reputations, is often a protective shell, not a reflection of our deepest being. By letting go of his name, the monk did not vanish. He became fully present, free from the weight of who he thought he should be, and in doing so, he became more available to life, not less. Psychological reflection. In modern psychotherapy, this reflects the practice of decentering, stepping back from rigid self-concepts that cause suffering. People often say, "I'm an anxious person, I'm a failure, I'm unlovable." But these are not facts, they are stories. Repeated labels, narrative therapy and ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, work by loosening these identities, not erasing the person, but softening the boundaries of self-description. The monk's freedom lies in the space between identity and awareness. He no longer reacts from the story of, "I am this." Instead, he responds from presence, from awareness, that precedes labels. This doesn't make him distant. It makes him more real, less mask, more mirror. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Samyutta Nikaya, "Just as a flame blown by the wind goes out and cannot be defined, so too is the awakened one, freed from name and form." And a Zen poem offers, "The wild geese do not intend to cast their reflection. The water has no mind to receive it." Tonight, sit with this question. Who would I be if I forgot my name? What remains when there's nothing left to define me? Not as an escape, but as an opening. Let the silence answer, and listen, not for a voice, but for the quiet within you that has never needed a name to be whole. Story 17. The Visitor Who Never Left. It began with a knock, soft, timid, as if unsure whether it belonged there at all. The temple sat high in the northern hills, tucked between cedar groves and river fog. No roads led to it, only footpaths and time. Visitors were rare. Those who came for silence, not shelter. But on that winter evening, the wind carried something else, and when the abbot opened the gate, he found a stranger. Thin coat, cracked hands, eyes like water that had seen too much sky. "May I come in?" the man asked. The abbot nodded, and so he did. The man said his name was Dago. He offered no background. He bowed deeply, spoke little, and followed the monk's routines with quiet humility. He helped in the kitchen, mended sandals, fetched water. He never missed a meditation, but also never sought the abbot's attention. Days passed, then weeks, then months. The monks assumed he would leave when spring came, but he didn't. One evening, a novice asked the abbot, "Who is he really? Why does he stay?" The abbot replied, "Why do you stay?" The novice blinked. "Because I'm learning the way." The abbot smiled. And he? Perhaps he's forgotten the question. By the second year, Dago was simply part of the temple. When new monks arrived, they thought he was senior. When elders grew sick, he sat with them, hand on hand, breathing softly until their last breath passed. He never taught, never lectured. But his presence settled things, like the hush after snowfall. One day, a visiting scholar asked Daigo, "What sutra guides your practice?" Daigo tilted his head. "The one no one has written yet." The scholar frowned. "Is that a Zen riddle?" Daigo smiled. "Only if you need it to be." Years folded into each other. The abbot passed. New ones took his place. The temple changed. But Daigo remained. He grew older, slower, quieter still, but never bitter, never rigid. Once, when asked why he had come, he answered, "I thought I was just passing through." And now, he shrugged. "I must have mistaken the outside for the inside." Eventually, the monks began calling him the visitor who never left, at first with jest, then with affection, then as a kind of koan, because they began to notice. Everyone else came with questions. Dago never seemed to need answers. Everyone else sought transformation. Dago only served. Everyone else had goals, paths, awakenings to chase. Dago simply breathed, listened, laughed when it was time to laugh. And in that quiet way, he became the temple's most mysterious teaching. When he died, it was spring again. Petals from the cherry trees fell across his folded hands. There were no final words, no requests, just stillness, just presence, exactly as he had lived. Commentary. Dago's story reveals one of Zen's most radical truths, that presence itself is practice. We often think of the path as a journey, starting somewhere, going somewhere, aiming toward enlightenment, peace, or transformation. But in Zen, the goal is not elsewhere. It is here, in the very breath, step, and silence we are already living. Dago never announces wisdom. He never teaches overtly, but he embodies what the ancients called suchness, the state of just being what one is, without pretension or seeking. In modern life, such a person may seem invisible, but they change rooms simply by entering them. They are not charismatic. They are real. Psychological reflection. Daigo represents the rare psychological state known as radical acceptance, the full embrace of the present moment without trying to control or fix it. In therapeutic contexts like dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, radical acceptance is taught to reduce suffering caused by resistance. It's not passive. It's an active willingness to allow what is. Daigo also reflects secure non-attachment. He isn't clinging to identity, status, or spiritual milestones. This allows him to be emotionally attuned, quietly influential, and remarkably at peace. Many of us live as spiritual tourists, dipping into practices for relief. Daigo is not a tourist. He became the path by walking it without urgency. By forgetting to leave, he arrived. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Itivuttaka, "There is a dwelling where there is no coming, no going, no standing, no dying, no being reborn. It is the end of suffering." And Zen offers, sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself. Tonight, ask, am I still searching for what I already carry? What might happen if I stopped waiting to arrive? Let Daigo's stillness guide you. You do not need to change your life to find peace. Sometimes you only need to stay, until staying becomes presence, and presence becomes home. Story 18. The Bowl That Remembered Rain. In the back garden of an old temple, half covered by moss and thyme, there sat a stone bowl. No one knew who had carved it. No records marked its origin. It did not match the others used for offerings or ceremonies. It simply sat beneath the eaves, cracked in one corner, unclaimed. Yet every time it rained, the bowl would fill. And every time the rain stopped, the water would remain, still, clear, reflecting the sky. It was said that the abbot never let anyone move it. "It remembers things we forget," he once whispered to a novice. "Let it teach you." That novice was named Riku. He was young, impatient, and, like most seekers at the beginning of their path, full of questions but short on listening. When assigned to sweep the courtyard, he rushed. When asked to chant, he spoke too quickly. When invited to sit in silence, he fidgeted. But he meant well. His heart was honest. He simply hadn't learned how to be still with what he didn't understand. The bowl, he noticed on his second week. It annoyed him. "Why is this useless thing here?" he asked. "It's not even beautiful." The abbot only smiled. "Sit with it." And so Riku did, reluctantly at first, then curiously. He began spending moments after chores sitting beside the stone bowl, especially after rain. He would stare at the water inside, watching how it trembled when the wind brushed past, how it calmed again once the air stilled. Sometimes leaves would fall into it. Sometimes dragonflies would kiss its surface. It changed without effort. It held, without grasping. And gradually, Riku began to wonder, what would it mean to be like this bowl? One day, during a particularly heavy storm, Riku stood at the threshold of the temple and looked out. The rain fell in thick silver threads, and the bowl, as always, sat waiting. After the rain ended, Riku returned to it. But this time, something was different. He leaned in and saw his reflection, tired, flushed, alive. He stared at himself in the bowl and whispered, "You remember the rain, don't you?" And for the first time in his life, he understood that memory was not about holding on to the past. It was about being shaped by it, without being soaked in it. From that day on, Riku changed. Not in grand ways, but he slowed down. He began to listen, between words, He noticed the space after the bell faded. He swept the courtyard not as a task, but as a gesture of care. And when others asked him what shifted, he only pointed to the bowl. Years later, after the abbot passed and Riku became a teacher himself, a new novice asked him, "Why keep that old cracked thing? Doesn't it leak?" Riku smiled. "No," he said. "It holds exactly what it's meant to." The boy frowned. "But it doesn't do anything." Riku placed his hand on the bowl's rim. "Neither does the sky," he said. "And yet it carries the rain." Commentary. This story offers a gentle metaphor for emotional receptivity and non-reactive awareness. The stone bowl is not active. It does not chase the rain. It does not try to be useful or beautiful. It simply is. And yet, in its stillness, it becomes a mirror, a teacher, a vessel of presence. We too have the capacity to be like the bowl, to hold experience without grasping, to reflect without distorting, to remember, not by clinging, but by letting our inner shape be softened by what life brings. The bowl's power lies in what it does not do, and that is where its wisdom dwells. Psychological reflection. In psychology, particularly mindfulness-based therapy, the image of a container is often used. Can you hold grief without collapsing? Can you contain anxiety without suppressing it? Can you witness your thoughts like clouds, your pain like rain, knowing it will pass? The bowl embodies this. It teaches effective tolerance, the ability to sit with discomfort without being overwhelmed. In trauma healing, especially somatic work, clients learn to expand their capacity to hold difficult emotions, like the bowl holding rain without overflow. This isn't passivity. It is grounded presence, a sacred form of strength. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Satipatthana Sutta, "Just as a skilled practitioner watches the body as body, feelings as feelings, thoughts as thoughts, neither grasping nor rejecting, but simply knowing." And Zen reminds us, the water does not cling to the bowl, nor the bowl to the water. Yet together they reflect the moon. Tonight, ask yourself, am I trying to fix the rain, or can I simply hold it? What would it feel like to become the bowl? Sit quietly. Feel what arises. Let it land. Let it stay. Let it pass. You are not broken. You are a vessel. And even your cracks let the light in. Story 19. The Cat at the Temple Gate. There was a cat who lived at the edge of the temple. No one knew where she had come from. She had appeared one summer morning, thin and silent, sitting by the southern gate as if she had always belonged there. The monks left a bowl of water. She drank, nodded, as cats do, and then curled beneath the stone lantern and fell asleep. From that day forward, she never entered the temple, but she never left it either. She sat at the threshold, watching, waiting. She was not affectionate. She did not meow or rub against legs. She did not seek shelter on rainy days or warmth in winter. Yet every morning when the bell rang, she would lift her head, stretch, and observe the monks as they moved in procession. Sometimes she blinked slowly as they passed. Sometimes she turned, her gaze to the forest beyond, as if remembering something older than the temple walls. The monks named her Tama, meaning jewel, not because she sparkled, but because her presence revealed things they hadn't noticed before. One novice, Hiro, became fascinated by her. He was young, intense, and burned with the desire to awaken, He meditated harder than anyone, asked the most questions, sat until his knees bled. But peace remained elusive. The more he tried to grasp it, the farther it slipped away. One afternoon, frustrated after failing to answer a koan given by the abbot, Hiro sat beside Tama at the gate. "I don't understand," he whispered. "What am I missing?" Tama blinked once, then yawned, then returned her gaze to the wind stirring the leaves. Hiro sighed. "She doesn't care about enlightenment," he muttered. And for the first time, he heard himself and laughed. After that day, Hiro began to sit by the gate each evening, not to chase answers, but to share stillness. Tama sat beside him, sometimes near, sometimes distant. She came and went as she pleased, but always she stayed at the threshold, neither inside nor outside, and over time, Hiro realized that she embodied something he had never been able to name, a being completely at ease with not belonging, or perhaps belonging everywhere by claiming nowhere. Years passed. Tama grew old. Her fur faded. Her movements slowed. One winter morning, the monks found her curled beside the gate, still and cold. She had not moved to shelter. She had not cried out. She had simply lain down on the threshold, exactly where she had always lived, and passed. They buried her beneath the plum tree just beyond the gate. No chants, no rituals, just a moment of silence, a breath, a bow. After her death, something strange happened. The gate where she used to sit became a place of quiet magnetism. Visitors paused there, feeling something they couldn't explain. Monks began to sit longer at that edge, feeling the presence of pause. The abbot once said, "The cat never tried to teach, but she left a teaching no one forgot." And the novices, especially Hiro, would smile and say, "She lived the koan we all fail to answer." Commentary. This story illustrates the profound teaching of liminality, the wisdom of the in-between. Tama never chose a side. She did not demand entry, nor reject belonging. She sat at the gate, embracing the middle path in its most mysterious form. Zen often speaks through paradox. To enter the gate, you must not seek it. To arrive, you must let go of arriving. Tama, in her quiet watching, becomes a living mirror of the path, not striving, not retreating, just being. And in that, she teaches what many books fail to explain. Psychological reflection. Tama's threshold presence reflects the human experience of liminal space, those moments when we are between identities, between decisions, between who we were and who we are becoming. These spaces often feel uncomfortable, undefined. We rush to escape them, but they are essential. In depth psychology, liminality is seen as the space of transformation, not the answer, but the waiting, not the clarity, but the pause before clarity forms. Tama teaches what it looks like to inhabit uncertainty without fear, to stop clinging to the need for resolution, to trust presence itself. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Udana, "There is, monks, an unborn, unoriginated, uncreated, unformed. Were it not for this, there would be no escape from the born, originated, created, and formed." And a Zen saying offers, "When you sit at the gate long enough, the gate disappears." Tonight, sit at your own threshold. Ask, what part of me wants to rush into the temple? What if peace is found in not arriving? Be like Tama, watch the world, let the wind stir your fur, belong to the edge, and know this. Sometimes the deepest wisdom is found not in stepping forward, but in sitting, still where the world begins to turn. Story 20. The Man Who Feared the Wind. There was once a man who built walls, not just one, but many. He was not a mason by trade, but a baker. Still, he became known in his village not for his bread, but for his boundaries. Each season he added another fence around his garden, around his yard, around his windows, around his thoughts. Wind brings trouble, he'd say. It was true in a way. When he was a child, a great storm had torn through his village. His father was lost to the river. His home swept away like a leaf. He had survived, barely. And since then he mistrusted the wind. Even in calm weather, he kept shutters closed. When others sat outside under stars, he stayed in. When people laughed in the fields, he glanced upward, wary of clouds. Better to be safe, he would mutter, hammering new nails into old wood. But what he could not see was this. Though the storm had long passed, he had been breathing behind walls ever since, and his fear, like wind, moved silently through every part of his life. One day, a traveller arrived in the village. She was wrapped in scarves and silence, her footsteps light as falling blossoms. She spoke little, but listened deeply. The villagers said she was a Zen nun, though she wore no robe and carried no alms bowl. She walked barefoot, slept under trees, and every evening she climbed the hill beyond the village and sat there, eyes closed, facing the wind. The man noticed, and it unsettled him. He watched her from his shuttered windows. When she passed his gate, he bristled. She reminded him of everything he had built himself against. One afternoon, as she sat by the riverbank, he approached her. "You sit too close to the current," he warned. She opened her eyes, smiled. "Do you fear the water?" "No," he said quickly. "I fear the wind that stirs it." She tilted her head. "What has the wind taken from you?" He looked away. "My father." She nodded. "And what has your fear taken from you?" The question struck like a chime in a silent hall. He didn't answer. He couldn't. That night, the wind howled through the village. Nothing fierce, just the moan of trees and old doors. But it rattled him. He sat awake, surrounded by his fences, staring at the walls he had built. And for the first time, he realized they were not keeping the wind out. They were keeping him in. At dawn, he walked to the hill. The nun was already there, eyes closed, arms slightly lifted to the morning air. He stood beside her. "I've spent years hiding," he whispered. She said nothing. "I thought I was protecting myself." She opened her eyes. "And were you?" He paused. "No," he said. "I was only alone." She nodded. Sometimes the wind takes, but sometimes it carries seeds. From that day, the man changed, not all at once, but quietly. He opened one window, then another. He sat outside for tea. He walked without checking the sky. He began to feel the wind, not as an enemy, but as a presence. Wild, yes, but also tender. He learned to let it touch him again. Seasons passed. The fences aged. Some fell. He didn't replace them. Instead, he planted trees, and when asked why, he smiled and said, "The wind needs something to sing through." Commentary. This story touches the universal wound of trauma and the defenses we build in its wake. The man fears the wind because it reminds him of what he lost. But in trying to keep out the wind, he also shuts out life, joy, connection, renewal. His story reflects a profound truth that the very thing we fear may also be what we need to heal. Zen doesn't seek to erase pain, it seeks to meet it with presence, to bow to the wind even as it stings, to listen even as it howls, and in doing so, we find the fences within us softening, and life, once again, moving through. Psychological reflection. From a psychological perspective, the man embodies avoidance-based coping, a common response to trauma. Avoiding reminders of pain can offer temporary relief, but over time, it constricts life. Healing comes not through force, but exposure with compassion. Therapies like EMDR, somatic experiencing, and mindfulness-based trauma work all recognize this. That safety does not come from hiding, but from resourced presence. The Zen nun doesn't fix the man. She invites him to remember his own aliveness, to trust again, to risk again, and to feel the wind without being shattered by it. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Salatha Sutta when, touched with a feeling of pain, the uninstructed person sorrows, grieves, and laments, but the instructed one feels the pain and does not suffer. And Zen reminds us, you cannot stop the wind, but you can open your sails. Tonight, ask yourself, what wind have I been trying to keep out? What if it's not here to break me, but to move me? Open the shutters. Breathe with the breeze. Let the fences age, and one day perhaps plant a tree, so the wind may sing again through the spaces you once sealed. Story 21. The Silence Beneath Applause. In a busy town nestled between two rivers, there lived a musician named Kaoru who was loved by everyone but herself. She played the shakuhachi, an ancient bamboo flute, so purely that when the notes rose, birds stopped singing and people forgot their errands. Her melodies were said to calm fevers, mend quarrels, bring tears to those who thought they could no longer cry. Each evening, she performed in the square beneath the old willow tree. People came in silence and left in awe, and always there was applause. Soft, reverent, endless. Yet when Kaoru returned home, her hands trembled. She could play before 100 strangers, but not in an empty room. She had mastered every note, except the one her soul longed to hear. Kaoru had once played for love. As a child, she had learned from her grandfather, who taught her not with sheet music, but with silence. The flute is not for impressing, he would say. It's for returning. Returning. Where? She once asked. To where you forgot you were whole. She didn't understand then, but she remembered the way his eyes shimmered when he said it, and that memory had become her compass, until he died, and the world grew loud again. After his death, Kaoru stopped playing for months. Then one day, an innkeeper asked her to perform. She agreed. The crowd wept. Her fame grew, and she began to travel from town to town, carrying her flute and sorrow. Applause followed her like an echo, but inside, something faded. She didn't know when it began, but over time her breath no longer felt connected to the wind. Her fingers no longer danced, only performed. Each note was flawless and hollow. One autumn afternoon, as the leaves turned to copper and gold, Kaoru visited a remote mountain temple on a whim. She sought solitude, not salvation, rest, not revelation. But what she found instead was a monk sitting beneath a pine tree, eyes closed, holding a flute carved from bone. He played one note, just one, And then silence. Kaoru froze. That single note seemed to fill the entire valley. She stepped closer. "Why did you stop?" she asked. The monk opened his eyes, smiled. "Because the silence after was enough." Kaoru stayed at the temple that night. The monk offered her tea, but asked no questions. Only when the fire dimmed did he speak again. "You carry a great beauty," he said gently, "but also a burden." She looked away. "Everyone says they love my music, but I don't feel heard." He nodded. "Because you've become the echo, not the voice." The next morning, Kaoru rose early. She walked alone to the top of the ridge where the wind sang between stones. She lifted her flute and played, not for the town, not for applause, but for the mountain, and then for the wind, and then, not even for that. She played for the silence that shaped her breath. And when she stopped, she heard something she had not heard in years. Stillness. Whole. Unbroken. She left the town soon after. People said she had retired. But sometimes, travelers spoke of hearing flute music at dawn, echoing through the high valleys. One note, then nothing. And they said it was more healing than any song they'd ever known. Commentary. This story explores the deep yearning for authentic expression and the subtle trap of external validation. Kaoru's journey reflects a common paradox. The more praise we receive, the more disconnected we can become from the original joy of our craft. Applause becomes a mirror we cannot see ourselves in. In Zen, true artistry is not performance, it is presence. It is the act of merging with the moment so fully that ego dissolves, and what remains is a gesture of being. The monk's one note teaches her this, that music is not made of sound alone, but of the silence that holds it. Psychological reflection. Kaoru's story resonates with the experience of imposter syndrome, perfectionism, and the hunger for approval. Many artists, leaders, and sensitive souls lose their connection to purpose under the weight of praise. The more we are seen by others, the harder it becomes to see ourselves. This story invites return to intention, to quiet, to wholeness. In acceptance and commitment. Therapy, ACT, values-based action helps individuals realign with their inner compass. Kaoru returns to playing not for applause, but for meaning, for breath, for the sacred quiet that first called her. This shift is not dramatic. It is inward, and it heals. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Sutta Nipata, like a musician tuning a lute, neither too tight nor too loose, balance brings the sweetest sound. And Zen reminds us, when the song ends, do not seek more notes. Bow to the silence that follows. Tonight, ask yourself, what part of me is performing? What would I do if no one was watching? Sit quietly. Hold your breath. Like a flute holds wind. Listen, not for applause, but for the stillness that has waited beneath every note. There you are. Story 22. The mirror that fogged slowly. There was once a mirror made of bronze, polished so perfectly that even moonlight could see itself clearly in its surface. It hung in the meditation hall of a forgotten temple, just above a stone basin where monks washed their hands before zazen. For generations, the mirror remained untouched by dust or corrosion. Its surface reflected not only faces, but moods, clouds, leaves drifting past the windows. Everything, just as it was. One day, a novice monk named Nari arrived. She was quiet, intense, and burdened by shame she could not name. She had left her family without a word. She carried grief folded into every breath. She followed the rules, sat the sittings, chanted the chants. But inside, she felt wrong, like a mistake in human form. She had come to the temple seeking purification, not of the body, but of the self. Each morning, Nari stood before the bronze mirror and whispered her private vows. I will be better today. I will not be angry. I will not remember. The mirror reflected her eyes. Nothing more. It offered no comfort, but it did not turn away either. It simply showed what was. Seasons passed. Nari tried to disappear into effort. She worked harder than anyone, rose before dawn, scrubbed the temple steps until her hands blistered. Yet she could not rid herself of the fog inside. Then, one humid summer morning, she noticed it. The mirror had begun to cloud. At first, only a small smear near the edge. Then a faint haze across its surface. Eventually, a breath-like fog dulled its perfect shine. Nari was horrified. She scrubbed it with cloth, with herbs, even polished it with oil and prayer. Still, the fog returned. She panicked. "I've ruined it," she told the abbot. He came to look and smiled. "This mirror," he said softly, "has not fogged because of you. It has simply begun to age." "But it was flawless," she cried. He nodded. "And now, it is human." That evening, she stood alone before it. The fog was real, but soft. It did not erase her reflection. It only blurred the harsh edges. For the first time, she saw not a mistake, but a face, a human face, and something in her cracked. Not like breaking, like a door finally opening. Over time, the mirror became a quiet legend in the temple. The elders said, "It fogs only when the heart is ready to see with compassion." New monks approached it nervously, but Nari, now older, wiser, gentler, stood before it every morning. She no longer whispered vows to become pure. She whispered reminders to remain whole. Commentary. The mirror that fogs is a sacred image in Zen, a metaphor for awakening through imperfection. Nari arrives thinking she must purify herself, erase her flaws, cleanse her past. But the path she walks is not toward perfection. It is toward wholeness. The fog does not destroy the mirror. It softens it, and in doing so, allows her to finally see herself not through judgment, but through mercy. Zen does not demand the eradication of our shadows. It invites us to bow to them, to see clearly, even when clarity is wrapped in mist. Psychological reflection. This story speaks directly to those who carry shame. Shame is not guilt for what we've done. It's the belief that who we are is fundamentally unworthy. Nari's over-efforting, her compulsion to be good enough, mirrors what many trauma survivors experience. The desperate hope that if they become pure, they'll be allowed to exist. But healing begins not with scrubbing, but with seeing, with holding our wounded parts in gentle awareness. Self-compassion, taught in therapies like compassion-focused therapy and internal family systems, is the fog that gently lifts the sharpness of shame. Through it, we don't erase the mirror, we transform how we see. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Dhammapada, "As a polished mirror reflects clearly, so should the wise cleanse their mind of judgment and dwell in acceptance." And Zen whispers, "The moon is still the moon, even behind clouds. The heart is still the heart, even through tears. Tonight, stand before your own mirror. Ask, what am I trying to scrub away? Can I see myself, fog and all, and still bow? Look gently, If the image is unclear, let it be. Sometimes it's not about seeing perfectly. Sometimes it's about being seen, even by the part of you that forgot how to look. Story 23. The Fire That Did Not Burn. Long ago, in a village surrounded by ash-coloured hills, there lived a boy named Ain who feared fire more than anything in the world. He wasn't always afraid. As a child, he loved to sit by the hearth with his grandfather, watching the flames dance like red silk. He would listen to stories of ancient temples, of dragons that guarded sacred lanterns, of monks who meditated through storms and smoke. But then, one winter, the fire changed. The wind howled, a lantern tipped, and in a single night, their home vanished in a blaze. N survived. His grandfather did not. Since then, fire was no longer warmth. It was a ghost. Even the smallest flame of a candle, a stove, a festival lantern made N freeze. He kept his distance. When others gathered around bonfires, he stayed in shadows. He carried the scent of scorched wood in his memory, as if his lungs still held the smoke. By the time he turned 20, he had become a quiet apprentice in the town's wood workshop. Ironic, perhaps, that he shaped what he feared would someday destroy him. The master craftsman, Suri, noticed. "You carve with tenderness," she once said, "but you live as though the world is kindling." N said nothing. But inside, he knew she was right. One autumn evening, Suri gave him a task. Deliver a carved offering bowl to a temple deep in the hills. They've asked for cedar, she said. You walk well. Go when the air is cool. He hesitated. Do they use fire? He asked. She smiled. It's a temple. There's always a fire, but this one listens. The journey took 2 days. The path curved through moss-covered rocks and streams thin as whispers. By dusk, he reached the temple gate. It was simple, weathered, lit by one torch that crackled faintly in the wind. He flinched at the sound. A monk welcomed him, bowed low, and led him to the main hall. Inside, dozens of candles flickered on the altar. Ain's breath caught. His hands trembled as he held out the bowl. The monk accepted it gently, then gestured to the hearth in the corner. Sit, he said. The fire here does not burn. Ain sat cautiously, as far as he could. The monk said nothing more, only stirred the embers, and in silence they watched. Not 10 minutes, not 20, but hours, until the flames became familiar. Then softer than memory. That night, An dreamed of his grandfather. They were sitting again by the hearth, just as they had years ago, but this time the flames did not roar. They pulsed, slow, patient, like breathing. You never let the fire say sorry, his grandfather whispered. N woke with tears on his cheeks. The next morning, the monk handed him tea. What did the fire say? He asked gently. That it was never angry, N replied. The monk nodded. Only hungry, like grief. When N returned home, he still stepped back from bonfires, but he no longer trembled at candlelight. He lit his own hearth slowly one evening, hands shaking, but stayed, and in the warm glow, his shadow danced for the first time in years. Commentary. This story speaks of trauma and the long shadow of memory that distorts the nature of things. Fire, once a symbol of connection and warmth, becomes, through tragedy, a symbol of threat. N's journey is not about extinguishing fire. It's about restoring its truth. Zen does not ask us to forget our pain. It asks us to meet it again with new eyes, to learn that what once harmed us may no longer wish to harm, that not all flames are destroyers, some are keepers of life. Psychological reflection. In trauma psychology, especially in somatic and exposure-based therapies, healing often involves reapproaching the feared object or memory, not to relive the pain, but to rewire the nervous system's response. Ain's transformation comes not from force, but from companionship with the fire. By sitting in silence with it, neither resisting nor fleeing, he gives his body a new story to live by. Fire remains fire, but his fear loses its claim over truth. In therapeutic language, this is integration. In Zen, it is liberation. Closing. Reflection. The Buddha said in the Fire Sermon, Adittapariyaya Sutta, all is burning, the eye is burning, forms are. Burning, burning with the fire of craving, of aversion, of delusion, but also when the mind is liberated. The burning is quenched. Zen later teaches, don't fear the fire, become it, then let it pass through. Tonight, reflect. What fire still burns inside me, not as heat, but as fear? Can I sit beside it, listen, and let it soften? Light a small candle, let it flicker, do not flinch, breathe with it, and know. The fire that once scorched you can become the fire that warms you, if you stay long enough to see it differently. Story 24. The Monk Who Forgot His Name. They said he had once been a scholar, a poet, a man of many titles. But by the time he arrived at the mountain temple, he had forgotten his name. He wore no sign, spoke few words, and bowed to everything. Birds, stones, broken steps. At first, the other monks were curious. What should we call you? They asked. He only smiled. What did you do before this? He bowed again. When pressed, he would simply say, I was someone. Now I am here. And that was all. In time, they called him Jikan, which means silent space. It suited him. He never rushed, never argued, never explained. He worked in the garden, swept leaves, sat in zazen, and slowly he became invisible, not because people ignored him, but because he no longer occupied the space that demanded to be seen. He was simply present, like the wind brushing through pine needles, like the way tea cools when you forget it. But not everyone was at peace with him. One novice, Rento, found Jikan's silence irritating. He acts like forgetting who he is makes him wise, Rento muttered. But names are important. History is important. He was earnest, young, and full of the desire to preserve tradition. One evening, after prayers, Rento approached Jikan as he cleaned the lanterns. Isn't it disrespectful, he asked, to erase the life you had? Jikan paused, looked at the flame and said softly, I did not erase it. I just stopped polishing the mirror of self. Rento frowned. But identity gives meaning. Jikan smiled. So does wind, and yet it leaves no mark. Then he returned to his sweeping. Later that night, Rento dreamt of standing in a hall of mirrors, each reflecting a different version of himself: student, monk, son, thinker, child. He ran from one to another, trying to decide which was real. But the more he looked, the less he knew, until he saw a final mirror, and in it, no reflection at all. Only space. He awoke, shaken, but lighter. The next day, he found Jikan watering the garden. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Rento picked up. Another bucket, and they worked side by side, two beings without history, shaping the present with their hands. Years passed. Jikan grew older, slower. One spring, he sat beneath the plum tree and did not rise. The monks gathered. They washed his body in silence. And when it came time to carve his memorial tablet, Rento stepped forward. "What name shall we write?" they asked. Rento thought for a long while, then said, "Leave it blank." Commentary. This story is about identity. The labels we cling to, the stories we repeat, the mirrors we polish to prove we exist. Jikan's forgetting is not dementia. It is surrender. In Zen, to forget the self is not to become nothing, but to become everything, to move beyond the tight skin of me and into the open field of being. He does not despise his past. He simply stops carrying it like a badge. He becomes a mirror that reflects everything and holds on to nothing. And in doing so, finds a kind of freedom most never touch. Psychological reflection. From a psychological lens, Jikan's path mirrors ego dissolution, a state explored in depth psychology, meditation, and even psychedelic therapy. The self we defend so fiercely is often a story, a collection of roles, traumas, ambitions. To see this story as flexible, even ephemeral, can lead to profound peace. Not dissociation, not collapse, but expansion. Therapies such as mindfulness-based self-inquiry or transpersonal psychology explore this, the loosening of rigid self-concepts, to allow deeper awareness to emerge. Jikan doesn't lose who he is. He steps back from needing to define it, and in that space, love arises. Closing reflection. The Buddha said in the Anatta-lakkhana Sutta, Discourse on Not Self, "This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself." And Zen teaches, when the self drops away, the 10,000 things shine. Tonight, sit in stillness. Ask not who you are. Ask, who am I without my name, my past, my story? Can I rest in the silence beneath the self? Let the question be the practice. And if a mirror shows you nothing, smile. Sometimes emptiness is the clearest reflection of all. Story 25. The sound that closed the circle. At the very end of the forest path, beyond the rice fields and the mist-veiled ridges, there stood a circular hall with no doors. No one knew who built it. There were no records, no stories passed down. Only the structure itself, round as the moon, open to the sky, and acoustically perfect. Every sound made within its curved walls echoed back, not louder, but clearer. It was called the listening circle. Monks from distant temples would sometimes walk days just to sit in its center, not to speak, but to listen. For in that place, even silence had a sound. One monk, Sei, came during the final year of his life. He had lived many roles, teacher, abbot, wanderer, and once, long ago, a soldier. Now, in his old age, his body ached, but something deeper inside him hurt more. He had never said what needed to be said. He had taught others to be present, but had quietly buried his own grief. When asked what he sought, he only replied, "A sound that belongs to no one." When he reached the hall, there was no one there. He bowed before the threshold, entered through the archway of vines and stood at the center of the circle. He said nothing, not for hours, not for days, only breath and stillness. Then one dawn, he placed his hands on his lap, closed his eyes, and whispered the first sound he had ever uttered in the world. Ah, the cry of a newborn, the sound of arrival, and it echoed, not as a child's scream, but as music that circled and returned, soft and resonant. Then slowly he spoke again, not with words but with tones, simple syllables, long vowels, breath carried by intention. Each note a letting go, each pause a funeral and a birth. He did not name his regrets. He sang them, and as he did, the circle changed, or rather, it revealed what had always been there. The wind moved differently. The birds stopped to listen. Even the sun seemed to slow, until, at last, Say uttered one final sound. Not loud, not grand, just true. It was the sound that closed the circle, and when it faded, so did he. Seated, upright, still breathing, but gone. They found his body the next morning, smiling. The acoustics of the hall still humming faintly, as if cradling his last breath, too. This day, no one records the sounds made in that circle. There are no devices, no names carved, no chants repeated, only people who come, who sit, who listen, and perhaps, when ready, who speak one sound that was waiting inside them all along. Commentary. This final story returns us to the beginning, not in time, but in essence. Say's journey is the path we all walk, from birth to silence, from form to formlessness. The circle hall symbolizes not only life and death, but the nature of the self, open, resonant, and always returning. His final act is not about closure, but release. In Zen, sound is not mere vibration. It is the formless expressing itself briefly before returning to stillness. To utter one's truth, not as a concept, but as a frequency, is to leave the world not with noise, but with clarity. Psychological reflection. In psychology, especially somatic and expressive therapies, there is deep recognition that not all wounds can be spoken with words. Some truths are pre-verbal. Some healing arises from tone, rhythm, breath. C's use of sound as release mirrors practices in sound healing, breathwork, even polyvagal therapy, where nervous system states are shifted not through logic, but through resonance. His final unburdening is not linguistic. It is embodied truth, let out, healed through being heard. Closing reflection, finale of series. The Buddha said, "In the sound of the bell, there is no self, no other, just awakening." And Zen offers, when the mouth is silent, the heart begins to sing. Now that you have heard these stories, these 25 ripples in the still pond of being, ask, what sound lives quietly within me, waiting to be released? Can I let go, not through words, but through presence? Sit, breathe, feel the echo of all that has passed, grief, joy, fear, wonder, and let it move through you, like a sound no longer held back. This is the end of the stories, but not of your practice. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the empty boat. If these stories touch something inside you, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more journeys inward, and carry this silence with you into the noise of the world. Until next time, bow gently, breathe fully, and listen. Always listen. If you've journeyed with us through these 25 Zen stories, thank you. These were not just tales. They were mirrors, soft echoes, gentle invitations to pause, breathe, and remember something timeless within you. If even one story brought you closer to stillness, helped you soften grief, quiet the mind, or simply sit with yourself in kindness, then the empty boat has served its purpose. We would love to hear what touched you. What did you feel? What stayed with you long after the sound ended? Please take a moment to leave your reflections in the comments below. Your voice may be the lantern for someone else still walking through the dark. If you found meaning here, share this journey with others. A friend, a loved one, someone who might need to hear that healing can come not with force, but with breath and silence. And if you wish to continue walking beside us through future stories of awakening and peace, subscribe to The Empty Boat. Let this be a resting place you can return to, again and again, until we meet again. Stay soft. Stay open. Stay listening. The Empty Boat.